and you're going to put in GWAL, and that's going to take you to a screen that has the schedule for today, that will allow you to move between sessions today. It has all the bios of all the speakers today, so you can really wrap your head around all the amazing people that are here with us. But most importantly, it also has every attendee who's here with us today. So you also get an opportunity to connect and to network in a meaningful way. However, if you're joining us using the web browser, rest assured this has the exact same functionality, so you will not be left behind. Before I get off stage, I do want to extend one final invitation to all of you, and that is for your voice to be heard today. So if you would like to send us questions during the panel discussion, questions that you hope myself and Tumelo can integrate into the conversation, you're going to have to do that by going into the session that you've selected on the app or the web browser, and you'll be able to send us those questions, and we will try to our best of our ability to ask as many of those questions in the panel discussion today. Lastly, for all of those who are with us in the physical environment, thank you so much for maintaining the COVID protocols, and we request for you to continue doing the same. And now, without much further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome trustee of the Motsepe Foundation, Dr. Rejoice Simelane, who's going to officially welcome and officially open today's proceedings and do the honors of welcoming our CEO. Can I get a round of applause for Dr. Simelane, please?
Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. I think all I have to say is good morning, and I welcome you to the 2017, 18, 19, 5th Motsepe Foundation Annual International Women's Day. My job is to welcome you and then introduce Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, the co-founder, deputy chairman, and CEO of the Motsepe Foundation. She is also the founder and chairman of Africa Fashion International, and of course we all know she is the chancellor of the University of Cape Town, among a long list of her titles and responsibilities. Dr. Moloi Motsepe.
Good morning, everyone. Let me first acknowledge the presence online of Minister Naledi Pandor, Minister Maite Nkwana Mashabane, the First Lady of South Africa, also joining us online, Dr. Tsepo Motsepe, as well as a delegation from Rwanda, led by the First Lady of Rwanda, Her Excellency, Mrs. Kagame. Good morning, everyone in the room, and good morning to everybody who's joining us online via Facebook and on the platform, and happy Women's Day to all of you. We met at this very venue last year on the 8th of March to celebrate International Women's Day. What a special day it was. What was really special for me on that day was our young matric students who felt impatient with our pace of change, especially given that the World Economic Forum tells us that it will take us more than 100 years to reach gender parity globally. They urged us to move on quicker. I also recall the joy in Gogo Sizani Ngubani's eyes when we presented her with an award for her work with rural women. What we never imagined was that our students would soon be unable to attend school due to lockdown, which immediately followed. Nor did we anticipate that we would have lost so many lives, loved ones, friends, relatives, colleagues, including women activists like Gogo Sizani Ngubane, Memogolo, Queen Mother Molutlekge, Dr. Vuyo Mahlati, Mrs. Dolly Mokhatle, Queen Noloyiso Sandile, and Karima Brown. Many of us have lost dear friends and family. And that's why it is so fitting today that the title of our summit is how we can bring women together to fight for gender equality. 2020 was a challenging year that brought urgency to old challenges. It has revealed how an economy that lacks resilience and full inclusion can have adverse effects on women, youth, and other vulnerable groups in society during a crisis. This is a watershed moment. This is a unique opportunity for us to build more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable global economies and communities. As President Ramaphosa said at his Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan in October 2020, we need to see this moment as a rupture with the past and an opportunity to drive fundamental and lasting change. Gender equality is an important moral and business imperative. Gender equality is not only a human rights issue, but also a pragmatic matter of attaining better economic performance. Our constitution and frameworks, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, require progress towards equality. But equality is not complete if it does not include equal opportunities to participate in the economy. An economy that is exclusionary on the basis of race or gender or other attributes cannot perform well, since it is not harnessing its full potential. The Motsepe Foundation recently completed a review of the economic inclusion of women and youth in South Africa, including the challenges that we've just gone through in 2020. We found that although there has been some progress since 2015, more needs to be done to create equal opportunities for women and youth. Unemployment rates remain high for men and women in general, but remain higher for women, especially Black African women, at 36%. In 2020, 3 million African women actively looking for work could not find any, and 1.3 million had given up looking for work. And this group represents the economic outsiders who, despite their skills and education, have no access to networks and opportunities. Rural women, in particular, live with the greatest burden, with their location sidelining them from sharing in their economic success. Women remain underrepresented in the private sector and overrepresented in the services and social economies, with rates of business ownership and access to credit still highly unequal. In 2020, in the 6 months to September, our economy lost 1.6 million jobs. Women's unemployment increased by 11.8% compared to 3.5% for men. Also, a Black African woman aged 24 had more than 1 in 3 chance of losing her job between March and September 2020. Now, these results point to continuing economic exclusion and high labor market vulnerabilities, and are important in how we think about transformation and economic recovery. Hence the title of the summit, Leveraging Women's Leadership in Post-COVID Economic Recovery. So, what can you do? What can we do? Policymakers, government and business leaders, men and women, need to act now to close the gender gap. Rwanda is a great example of what happens when a country's intervention is aligned with putting its full human resource to use, including addressing deep-rooted attitudes about and behavior towards women. I'm reminded of a driver who recently picked us up at the airport in Rwanda, and he noticed me staring at a mother and child statue in the garden on our way to the hotel. He quietly and proudly stated that the statue I was looking at represented how women of Rwanda are held in high regard. He told me that women in Rwanda hold high positions in politics and in their economy. I was totally impressed. Now, this explains why, according to the World Economic Forum Gender Parity Index, for the last 6 years or more, out of 153 countries that were measured, Rwanda has repeatedly rated amongst the top 10 alongside Nordic countries in the Gender Parity Index ratings. The country performs better than many, including nations in Europe and in the United States. And that is because of a focus on women and youth empowerment in education, health, economy, and civil society participation. Now, my country and your country, South Africa, is doing well in political participation and in health, but not so well in economic participation. Actually, we're doing fairly well. Out of 153 countries, we rank about 17. Whereas Rwanda last year ranked number 9 out of 153 countries. So, with this positive approach, the foundation is proposing the following. Number 1, we need significant incentive schemes targeted at women entrepreneurs, including a focus on women-owned and managed businesses in the supply chain in which the entrepreneur contracts. We would also like to encourage banking institutions in particular to consider applying gendered lens when assessing credit history of women who want to start businesses. Access to funding for women entrepreneurs needs to be made easier, considering that most women do not have assets required to for banks to make the required credits and loans. Secondly, the world of work is changing. Economies are increasingly driven by knowledge and innovation. We need to make higher education more accessible and to ensure that our boys and girls are supported in STEM fields. The Motsepe Foundation has committed over 3,000 bursaries for students in all 27 South African universities to pursue STEM careers. Thirdly, the next few years are also a perfect time to support and grow the social economy, which can create jobs, promote innovation, and contribute to structurally transformed economies. Social entrepreneurship appeals to many women and youth because of its ability to transform people and planet, whilst applying sound business principles to sustain their future. The Motsepe Foundation over the past 6 years has partnered with the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship in order to promote and support this sector on the African continent. The care economy is the oil that keeps our economy going and needs to be valued differently, even though it does not create direct GDP accounted economic difference. And lastly, the President's commitment to combating gender-based violence and the generous support by private sector to the GBV Fund is also commendable. We applaud the President's commitment to economic empowerment of women, including Cabinet's approval of 40% public procurement going towards women-owned businesses. We call upon leaders, men and women who care about human rights and economic growth and development of our countries, to work harder in harnessing women's leadership to ensure that women can become active participants in the post-COVID-19 pandemic recovery and beyond. Gender equality is not a women's issue. Men and boys have to take it seriously. It is a moral imperative. It makes business as well as economic sense. I now have the absolute pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Her Excellency Jeanette Kagame, the First Lady of the Republic of Rwanda, founder and chairperson of Imbuto Foundation. Over to you.
It's a great pleasure to join you here today, a day reserved for not only celebrating women, but also reflecting on the challenges we face and exchanging ideas on how to sustainably improve our lives. Allow me to begin by thanking the Motsepe Foundation for this timely opportunity to discuss with great minds such as those gathered here the possibilities of harnessing the role of women in the pandemic recovery. Dr. Motsepe, your efforts to promote the quality of life for all in your country, governed by the African philosophy of Ubuntu, resonates more powerfully than ever. Thank you for sharing the statistics that shows us we still have a lot to do. Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought with it unprecedented challenges. Its initial consequences have had a ripple effect on all socio-economic sectors and has threatened to bring nations and communities at a standstill. Women and girls, unsurprisingly, have been affected the most. They are more at risk of infection, given their roles as caregivers, not only within their families, but also as frontline healthcare workers. Furthermore, challenges faced by various sectors, most especially in education, have had a different impact on women than their male counterparts, like you rightly said in your speech. Women in general, in comparison to men, are economically strained, as many have had to limit their work and economic opportunities to respond to increased household responsibilities. My country has also learned that out of tragedy and necessity, Rwandan women have demonstrated unimaginable resilience. Post-genocide data recorded that women and girls made up 80% of Rwanda's surviving population. They bravely stepped in to fill the leadership void, and aided by women civil society groups, lawmakers have introduced some of the most women-friendly policies in the world. I'm proud to report that since 2003, Rwanda has consistently had the highest female representation proportionally of parliamentarians in the world, currently 61.3% in the lower house, and 53.3% of seats in the cabinet are occupied by women. Rwanda's values and expectations for women have changed in a generation, as more of them have entered the government's ranks. The impact has been inspirational, in addition to shaping laws and policies. Today, seeing women in Parliament has given women and girls confidence and pride as we also acknowledge that behind such accomplished women, there are open-minded men, selfless men, free of traditional norms that too often limit women from flourishing. Esteemed audience, allow me to highlight here an interesting fact about gender equality in Rwanda, as women did not have to fight for their rights in the streets. Rather, these rights were achieved through a conducive environment and legislative action thanks to the vision of our leadership. As expressed by President Kagame, we cannot claim to be on a sustainable path to transform Rwanda if we exclude women who are more than half of the population. However, despite significant achievements, changing conservative mindset is not sometimes something that happens overnight. Gender relations within families do not always change at the same pace as government policies. No matter how vast the power of a woman is in public, it can still stop at her front door. We must therefore ask ourselves, what should be the next steps towards gender evolution in our private spheres? How must we engage men and boys in instilling gender equality principles for a young age? How must parents, teachers, and community leaders tackle gender norms standing in the way of real change within our families and society at large? Indeed, what connecting dots will help us see these frameworks, policies, law, and enforcement mechanisms effectively transform our homes to totally free ourselves from all these imbalances. Distinguished guests, like the rest of the world, Rwanda has not been spared by the COVID-19 pandemic. From lessons learned during the Ebola crisis, the country quickly set up a national crisis committee of key ministries when the first cases were reported in March 2020. 1 year later, all systems were ready to dispatch 340,000 doses from a biomedical center warehouse in Kigali to district hospitals and onwards to hundreds of health centers across Rwanda. And this vaccine shipment should protect about 171,500 frontline personnel, as well as other priority citizens such as those over 65 or with underlying health conditions. 1 year into COVID-19 crisis, we take a moment to point to both the disproportionate burdens that women and girls carry and the centrality of their contributions. And for this, mitigation measures would need to include a comprehensive and culturally sensitive approach that integrates challenges of employment, childcare, and education. And I take this opportunity to applaud the Motsepe Foundation for the roadmap to address some of these issues. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, it's my deepest wish that we truly embrace the spirit of Ubuntu, that our dear host, Dr. Motsepe, passionately promotes, and walk away today with a renewed commitment, ideas, and deeper connections geared towards protecting the most vulnerable and precious among us. The late Nelson Mandela once said that it takes a unique woman who can turn the whole world around and make it the best living place to experience. I encourage you, my fellow sisters and dear daughters, to embody this belief, because we, as leaders, sisters and mothers, must continue working hard, especially during this pandemic. As the past year highlighted the gender inequities around us, together we must continue challenging the status quo. To the sons, brothers, and husbands, we count on you to adhere to the he for she principles and walk the journey with us to level the playing field and effectively build the road to recovery. Together, let us not lose the lessons of the pandemic, but rather ensure that women and girls harness their true powers in their homes, their countries, and the world at large. Thank you for your kind attention, and wish you all a happy International Women's Day.
It's a massive thank you to Her Excellency, the First Lady of Rwanda, Mrs. Kagame, reminding us, of course, of the centrality of Ubuntu as we look to reimagine the blueprint of society. Could we be brave enough to put Ubuntu at the center? She talks about the economic recoveries that we're seeing, and whether we're asking the question whether it is a rollout of vaccines, whether it is an economic recovery package, whether we've put a gendered lens to those efforts, and whether we've centered women. Because as we know, the executive director of UN Women always says, if a policy works for women, the likelihood is it is going to work for the whole of society. And of course, she reminds us through the he for she principles that gender equality is not a woman's problem, but it is a problem that humanity needs to solve. And our time is running out, ladies and gentlemen. We are in the decade of action, the decade where by 2030 we must have achieved gender equality. And so with that, I'm going to now very briefly introduce our next esteemed guest. We're joined by the Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. We know that our Minister has served the country in various capacities, including being the Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform, including taking up the portfolio of international relations and cooperation. Today, she joins us to also share her words, her remarks this morning. Please help me welcome Minister Maitenkwane Mashabane to please take to the virtual stage. Thank you very much, Minister.
To our mother, First Lady of of Rwanda, Ms. Jeanette Kagame, through the protocol, Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, a forever activist. I don't know when do you get time to sleep. Mrs. Irene Chanley, President of International Women's Federation of South Africa, Professor Puleng Lekabula, Vice Chancellor of the University of South Africa, Mr. Daniel Minella, Group CEO of APSA, Nados Bekele, Sister, UN Representative Coordinator in South Africa, fellow panelists and guests. Ladies and gentlemen, this month is a very auspicious month. It is a month where we celebrate womanhood throughout the world. It is International Women's Day celebration, but also that women haven't given up providing solutions as they try to take care of themselves, even during difficult times. Here we have another lifelong celebration, celebrated by one and all, of our mother, Charlotte Manye Mateke, who, if alive, she would be 150 years old. Why are we bringing her into the mix? Because she is part of it. When things were tough politically, she pushed her way in. When things were tough in America, when she went to study and became the first Black woman to become a scientist, taking along with her husband, who came back a qualified referent. She helped Black women or Black people who were members of the AME to have their church next door because they were not allowed in the main church. She came back home, and the first thing she had in mind, education. She built Wilberforce in Sidibeng, for those who know Johannesburg. This celebration for us as women would incomplete without spending a day at Wilberforce. On the 7th of April, we are spending the whole day of a birthday in Botokwa. I'm therefore grateful to Motsepe Foundation for extending this opportunity to me and to women of South Africa to harness the role of women in this pandemic. Women, when there is a pandemic, or when they're struck by a pandemic, they do not take care of women alone. They take care of families. When there's a need to take care of frontline workers, women will be there and will be doing it. And we will not be wondering what will happen to me. By the way, COVID just opened more gates for us to see that as for triple oppression, women are still battling with it. But even with that, they would not say, there's COVID now, let's go take care of our troubles. They will be there. They will try, and by all means, to take care of their families. Here in South Africa, we also have another pandemic of gender-based violence and femicide. Femicide is when your loved ones, the ones that you think were going to protect you more, are the ones who say you must die. This morning, says the chairperson of the Motsepe Foundation, I was waylaid for 15 minutes because there was a radio announcer who insisted on asking me to answer him as to why a man that all people felt he was a kind man and a caring man, chose to not only kill, but ban his lovely wife. I'm talking about this morning. We do have a challenge of a mental disproportion where women are just dying. And I think if we are not denying it, we need action, and we need action now. Women are not excluded for all these calamities. Women are dying of COVID. Women will be the ones organizing on how, even with all COVID protocols, a woman should be buried with dignity, or a man with dignity. They don't choose. But that we also observe these protocols so that those who live continue doing that while we bring livelihood on the side. Had it not been for COVID, we will be in New York. This is for the second time. We will be discussing generation equality. A lot of people do not understand why and what we mean by generation equality. It simply means when we were young, we were people, I'm talking about Africans, of oral tradition, of what is done and what is not done in our tradition. But it is important since Mexico, where we had the first meeting of women, global meeting, to Beijing, to now several meetings that have been held annually, this time for the 65th time in New York, talk about how do we bring 50-50. 50-50 of men and women, not taking power for the sake of power, but also making sure that our youth are coming closer and taking over, because when we age, the spirit should not be buried with us. It also says that as we try harder with these modern technologies, we should leave no one behind. Leave no one behind, protect everyone, each one, teach one, men and women, but this is a special space, CW65, that's for women, so that women can keep strategizing how we should continue making the world a better place, but that we raise educated, skilled people who care about other people as we move on to the next decade. We will one day become greenies. We want responsible, people who, as they say, we take over the baton. They mean it. Because of COVID, our young women were also going to be saying, here is a global pandemic. How do we survive global pandemics? Because I'm told when the last global pandemic in 1928 happened, women get together had already happened. And they have, some have passed on, some have survived. But how we survive this and keep together, it's very important for all of us, for all leaders of society. But also that this year our focus would also be of generation equality. We were going to focus on economic empowerment for women, so that women do not remain in toxic organizations, I'm sorry, not organizations, families. Because if I don't stay in this, I am going to be burnt to death. I'm sure that the threat of burning this dear lady to death was not the first one. But because women stay in relationships, because if they don't, they will die. Look at us now. She did not go. She's burned to death. On a very auspicious day when we start the celebration of women across the world. We will continue battling with COVID. We will find a way, working in partnership with our male counterparts, to make sure that it becomes history, and those who remain continue working together. The president has also launched private sector GBF fund. That is, if we say together, we don't mean government workers, and so on, so on. But that also private sector has come forward, and all thanks to the chairperson with us here, the South African one, to make sure that the private sector also put their hand, because they are part and parcel of the community, part and parcel of this country, that they also want to make a contribution to take us forward. We are very much interested, because we are not visitors in this continent. We are very much excited about the African Continent Free Trade Area Agreement of African countries. Many women have been, had it not been for COVID, already been making strides in she trades across the borders. We are also appealing that we wish, as we fight COVID, we also open space for women and we work together, that there would be no border for women as she trades, as we move on. In conclusion, I would like to congratulate Professor Puleng on her appointment as the Vice Chancellor of UNISA in the 151 years. For the first time, a woman heads the institution. The need to support each other, not only put women leadership roles forward, but put support and keep them there. They must not remain decorations, because they do care. I thank you, and I wish one and all, Africa and the world, a very happy day whilst we are battling with this pandemics that I have referred to. Thank you.
We come out of that 5th Gender Equality, Wellness and Leadership Summit with word from the Minister in the Presidency for Women, Children and People Living with Disabilities, Maitengwana Mashabane. Also a beautiful address earlier on by the First Lady of Rwanda, Ms. Jeanette Kagame. Let's take you now back to the State Capture Commission. Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo
Chairman of Smile Telecoms. She's also the President of International Women's Forum South Africa. Please help me welcome Madame Irene Shanley. Thank you so much.
Her Excellency Mrs. Jeanette Kagame, Honorable Minister Ms. Maite Ngwana Mashabane, esteemed speakers, representatives of private sector, philanthropists, public sector, academia, media, civil society, IWFSA, Dr. Precious Malloy Motsepe, and the leadership of the Motsepe Foundation. Good morning, Mr. Motsepe. Ladies and gentlemen, I feel truly humbled and privileged to form part of this remarkable event hosted by the Motsepe Foundation. On behalf of the International Women's Forum of South Africa and the 7,000 members of IWF Global, we salute and applaud the amazing contribution the Motsepe Foundation have made in creating a pipeline for women in STEMs, for the contribution made in delivering PPEs in South Africa and across the continent, and for the work the Foundation continues to do, especially for the many vulnerable women in our nation. Today, we celebrate International Women's Day. It's a day we remember and appreciate women's overall achievements. It is indeed these achievements that we need to harness, nurture, and strengthen in order to drive the role of women as the global agents of change. The rise in domestic abuse cases during the pandemic in South Africa, they are frightening, they are alarming, and they terrify us. For us, the private sector not only has a stake in the prevention of GBVF and in the social and economic empowerment of survivors, but also need to demonstrate responsible corporate citizenship in the fight to achieve gender equality. Equally, there is still much to be done on diverse and important issues such as economic equality, gender equality and pay parity, political status, and reproductive justice. For me, the big question is, what have South African women's overall achievement been, particularly since we attained democracy 27 years ago? For years, women have been making incremental strides, albeit slow, in corporate South Africa in pursuit of equity in pay and positions. But much more can be done to get more African women appointed in executive leadership positions and to the boards of all major corporations across all economic spheres. This is illustrated by research findings. According to BWASA, women comprise only 20.7% of non-executive directors on the JSE listed companies, and about 29.4% are executive managed, although there are other reports which indicate that it's 9%. PwC says that currently, out of all the companies listed on the JSE, a mere 3.31% of their CEOs are women. Politically, our Rainbow Nation has made notable progress and is arguably one of the most gender diverse parliaments in the world. We've heard earlier ranking number 3 in Africa after Rwanda and Ethiopia, and 10th globally. However, our country still falls short in achieving gender parity. At a provincial level, women's representation increased from 30% to 43% after the 2019 elections. Limpopo province has the largest proportion of women, I'm not sure if you knew that, with 53% of women in the legislature, surpassing the South African Development Community's parity target. Additionally, women constitute 43% of cabinet and 40% of councillors in local government. As we celebrate these achievements, the big challenge is, how do we become more effective in inspiring change, not only in numbers, but also delivery? Reflecting back on the topic for today, how do we harness the power of women to bring change? The key lies in the further economic empowerment of women, as clearly outlined by UN Women and championed by all women's organizations. Women economic empowerment is central in realizing women's rights and gender equality. When more women work, economies grow. Women's equality is good for business. As an executive who worked for many years across the continent, I know that we can work as individuals, as members of a group, or as a community organization to inspire greater and meaningful change. Whatever avenue we choose, we can inspire and achieve change by voicing opinions and concerns in numbers. Be that voice. Together we can harness our role as women in the pandemic recovery. Much of the existing shortfalls have been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. We all know that. We have lost many amazing women and men during this period, whom we have learned from and held in highest regard. Let us use the reboot as a catalyst for more rapid and deliberate change for women, girls, and children, allowing a liberated and more economically empowered future of our nation. Let us work together to mobilize our communities, neighborhood, and society in journeying as women, with women as agents of change. Let us commit to the call of action. What did we say? Count me in. Let's all stand and say it. Let us all say, raise that hand, even those online. Let's all say it. Count me in. Count me in. Count me in. Happy International Women's Day.
A massive thank you to Madame Irene Sharley, reminding us, of course, that gender equality is good for business. It makes economic sense. The business case has been sold. All we need to do now is to act, and part of that acting is to ensure that as we raise our hands and say, count me in, that we are raising our hands to challenge systems, behaviors, habits, practices that keep gender equality out of reach of women and out of reach of our society. Moving swiftly along now, I've been looking forward to this conversation as we welcome Professor Puleng Lenkapula. We have heard as Minister Nkwane Mashabane was indicating her congratulations that she is, of course, the very first woman Vice Chancellor in the 148-year history of the University of South Africa. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Professor Lenkapula.
Molweni, Duvelang, Sanibonani. Good morning. Thank you very much. I am appreciative of the opportunity to come and share some insights on International Women's Day. But I'd like to particularly express my gratitude to Dr. Moloi Motsepe, the co-founder of the Motsepe Foundation. Mr. Motsepe, who is present as well, Minister Naledi Pandor, Minister Nkwane Mashabane, the First Lady of Rwanda, Mrs. Kagame, all esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Program Director, allow me to express my gratitude on behalf of the University of South Africa for us to come and share today on the International Women's Day, a day that is aimed at asserting the dignity, talent, individuality, but also the participation of women in forming society in its economic, social, and other responsibilities. You'd realize that I'm still As I reflect on the title of today's talk, Harnessing the Role of Women in Pandemic Recovery, it dawned in me that we cannot think about the aftermath of the pandemic and thinking futures if we don't attend to the current context of the pandemic and its attendant challenges. In particular, I thought, what would it mean for us to thinking around women through a gendered lens when, in the context of the life that we live, there are gender non-conforming and others who require attention. Thank you. So I thought it's important for us to emphasize that women have always been at the center of economic systems. They've been at the center of political systems, even when they are not when their names are not lifted up. I thought it was important for us to say, women play multitude roles and execute them quite well, especially when the ground and the context within which they execute these responsibilities are supportive, affirming, and enabling for their moral agency. I wanted to say that the role of women in the volatile times of the pandemic have been very clear at the center of the care system. The arrival of the pandemic on our shores came at a time when we were busy negotiating the long-standing difficulties which had been formed structurally by the histories of the past, which to a large extent had marginalized women, or if it chose women, it tended to glorify or underrepresent their talents. Since the start of the pandemic in early 2019, over 11,419 cases and 2 million of those who have been sick have been recorded. The World Health Organization gives us these statistics about death and dying and the lack of well-being that have been recorded. Although these there has been also underreporting on the cases and deaths on pandemic. We have recognized through the statistics that the United Nations has given that women globally have tended to get a little less sick than men, wherein 50% of the pandemic, of which the pandemic affected men, when in actual fact, in the context of South Africa, the same is not to be experienced. In South Africa, more women at 57% have been infected when compared to the global statistic that I've just shared. Probably, when we look at the socio-economic impact of the pandemic, research shows that women are affected disproportionately as they occupy the roles of caregiving in the home, in the workplace, especially as frontline workers or even in the essential services that they work in. And even caregiver roles, and even leadership positions, and even income participation for women become the impediments they contend with, even in the context now. Crenshaw, the feminist scholar who is based in the United States, reminds us that we cannot think about the futures of the pandemic if we don't think around the inequities that are persistent, which have been facilitated by racism, classism, gender, and other historical dimensions of inequality. We, however, can think about the futures if we constructively think around ways that we can promote women's well-being, supporting infrastructures and systems which are enabling for them to participating constructively. And therefore, we must ask multi-layered questions. If women are to be leaders that are efficient, impactful, and transforming of their society, what would be the environments that such would be? Who is in the sector that promote well-being and care? How differently are they impacted? Which sectors are facing the most impacts on the pandemic might be relevant questions to ask. These questions are not only just questions for the sake of rhetoric, but they are questions that enable us to realize that differentiation and multidisciplinary, multi-pronged interventions are quite important if the overall success in rethinking futures, including pandemic recovery, were to be successful for women and their communities, not just women alone. The starting point would therefore be, we cannot address the pandemic recovery by a single issue, as Audre Lorde reminds us. We must have multi-pronged approaches in order to ensure that the intersecting interventions speak to the sustainability of the interventions that we are going to be putting in place. And therefore, we must be attentive to the inclusion of sexuality, age, class, occupation, and intersecting opportunities that the fourth industrial revolution and its attendant development of economic systems through technological and knowledge interface are important. This implies, for those like me who come from the higher education, the pandemic recovery is not only around health and well-being, but also around instituting infrastructure systems and educational systems that take into cognizance the relevance and roles of science, of knowledge, and of ideation as important levers for resourcing decisions that will help in the solutions towards the future. The questions, for instance, that have troubled scholars in the past year have related to the workplace environments and the transformations towards working from home or the multimodal elements of work. Who works outside the home and who struggles to find steady digital access tools, which have already been referred to. How do systems ensure that women activate their talents and therefore transform business, political landscape, as well as higher education in order to ensure that we have steadily growing women leaders, women professors, women business owners, and not just employed business? How do we ensure that we do not only celebrate being the only or the first, for example, vice chancellor or the first business owner, the first black person to do this, but instead create epistemic communities and platforms that ensure that we cultivate in the 25 years of our democracy multiple and many numbers of women whose leadership can inform, support, and transform society and social institutions for the better. The Commission for Gender Equality and its African Gender Development Index tells us that the educational access and statistics that when boys and girls get to basic education, they both participate quite well and become competitive. When they move into the pipeline of higher education, many either get to universities. However, majority of boys or men get into the natural science and other streams, and therefore participate in the economic systems that allow inventive participation, whereas the women are often taken into the streams where they will look for jobs or be employed by others. And if we are to make pandemic recovery, for those of us in higher education, therefore, must emphasize the imperative from medicine, science, technology, and creatives in basic education, high school and universities, so that we can form intellectuals, but also contributors to the economic development that are not dependent on technological systems or knowledge systems that they buy from elsewhere, but which they develop themselves in order to create participation in the global arena where South Africa, the continent, can participate as an equal, not a beneficiary. This means the women in higher education in other sectoral areas must always at points look towards holding others so that they are not the only women in the participation or in the transformation of gender inequity or gender injustice in the world. What are the strategies that women and their communities must use in order to ensure that there is gender transformation and equitable transformation in the aftermath of COVID? Which working arrangements would allow women in their communities, network systems to function optimally? What structural concerns would impede women that we should actually attend to? I want to use intersectionality to frame my talk, despite it being one of those areas that feminist scholars have raised as an important lever for us. This is precisely because gender equality cannot make sense unless we reassert the relevance of feminism as an important theoretical lens that assert the equality of men and women and not necessarily negate the value of men. I want to also emphasize that if we take gender equality as an important lens read through feminist optics or lenses or analytics, we would therefore work towards a society that harnesses the roles of women in pandemic recovery, that understands how women access advantage and when they are vulnerable, how they overcome vulnerability. This opportunity is quite important because it doesn't only attend to the micro issues around women, but also their intersectional micro, meso, and macro issues, which are quite important for these impact on women and their standing in society, particularly questions of mental health, which are often associated with the grief that has surrounded ways of dying and ways of being sick that the COVID-19 have made so real in our lives. First, let me also speak around in a brief way some of the ideas that I think are going to be important for thinking futures and pandemic recovery. In 2008, global governments, after the challenges of the economy, were able to invest some resources in reactivating business and corporate lives. This meant that at least there was a recovery plan that was in place for different countries to ensure that the corporate or business sectors were alive. In the post-COVID pandemic context, it will be important to learn from that global intervention to ensure that women, in particular, participate in systems that will enable them to recover, to replan, and to reactivate and regenerate their interventions and agency in overcoming the pandemic. This may mean for those who are in micro business, microfinance must be available at nominal interest, but with support to ensure that whatever business intervention they participate in can be successful. The second is that if we ensure that we put mechanisms in the economic systems, they must be accompanied by research, ideation, which are quite important levers of the knowledge economy as claimed by the World Economic Forum. Our societies can succeed if we invest in education, for it is in education that transformation, research, innovations can intersect with the aspirations for changing the world. We noted that during the lockdown, when women needed measures that meant to help them escape the pandemic, that to a large extent, those who were exposed to violence in the homes sometimes lacked or had nominal support within their homes. Nduna makes a case that violence against women and children, if traced back historically to the context of welfare, would offer us important insights in ensuring that we eradicate violence in the homes, in the world of work, but also in the businesses that women participate in. She illustrates that for us to ensure that we activate multiple examples of ensuring that there is support against violence, we must ensure that we call out those who perpetrate and perpetuate violence. But it is not only in the advocacy that we can change the pandemic systems and its attendant discontents, but we must ensure that we constantly advocate for lived realities, relationships that are affirming, that are loving, that do not embrace violence. And therefore, she suggests that we shouldn't just be shy also to affirm the ideas that, am I next? Is this a femicide pandemic that we should be contesting? How do we contest it? How do we stop killing of women? How do we ensure that through our social systems and networks, we create shelters that help women to speak out and to overcome their violence that they continue to experience? How do we as communities ensure that homes do not become dangerous spaces that women and girls must be flying away from during this pandemic lockdown or pandemic context? In this article, she asserts that gender-based and gender inequality must be social systems that we change. We should first change them through addressing the cultural and religious norms that often recalibrate and re-support the very same violence systems that must be overcome. In September 2019, journalists Michael Cohen and Paul Viciotto revealed gruesome picture of the horror of gender-based violence in South Africa. Also, Phumla Xola, in her book, Rape, in her seminal book, Rape, A South African Nightmare, has revealed to us the extent that the social ill here in South Africa expresses itself, something to which our own president has referred to as the second pandemic. And therefore, if we are to transform the second pandemic, we will need to ensure that we make education accessible, it becomes an important lever for transformation, but also it activates economic system. We ensure that, as Statistics South Africa says, we move women not only to participate in the care economy, but also to translate economic knowledge and economic systems beyond just the care system, so that the care system is not rendered nominal. Finally, we should ensure that our systems take into cognizance the imperative for addressing mental health and wellness, which have become the burdens for many in society, particularly because of the losses of loved ones and the healthcare challenges that we have encountered. I wish to thank you, Program Director, and the Motsepe Foundation for prioritizing gender justice as an important lever for our society and the continent, and encourage you to continue partnering with universities and higher education systems so that these issues are not just dreams but are become reality. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to move right along, and just to, of course, thank Professor Lenkabula for her thoughts. Listening to the range of questions she asked, I thought we have so many theses and dissertations that need to be written. There are so many questions that need to be answered. We've heard from women in the boardroom. We've heard from women in political office. We've heard from women in academia. We've heard from women in the healthcare sector. But we're also joined online right from the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, by queens and women who are leaders in our traditional communities. And I just do want to take a moment to acknowledge them at this point. Our next speaker, who's going to give us her brief remarks, is a speaker that needs no introduction when we talk about leadership in South Africa. She is our current Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. She has led us for many years as our Minister of Higher Education and Training, and she's also been the leader and a front runner in showcasing what is possible when women take up the sciences, technology, and innovation. And this she did as she led us in the Ministry of Science and Technology. It's my pleasure to welcome now Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor for her opening or key remarks that she's going to be giving us on the platform. Over to you, Honourable Minister.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you very much, Program Director. Allow me, in respect of protocol, to recognize the First Lady of Rwanda, Madame Kagame, my colleague ministers, excellencies, ambassadors, and leaders of international organizations in South Africa, and of course the Motsepe Foundation co-founder and CEO, our host, Dr. Precious Motsepe, who I had the opportunity to speak to in preparation for this meeting, and I hope I'm on the spot in terms of the interest she indicated. And then distinguished panelists and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, when one thinks about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact, for us in international relations, we've had to assume a key role in responding to the impact of the COVID-19 crisis by calling on the various international networks that we have to work with as per our work on a daily basis. Prior to the pandemic, global multilateralism had been severely marginalized by the United States' isolationist policies and by their robust attacks on multilateral institutions, particularly United Nations bodies, as well, of course, as the important institution, the World Health Organization. One of the lessons we found of diplomacy is that we have in this field to develop the ability to build international networks and to use these maximally whenever needed. One of the lessons we learn is that picking up the phone and calling colleague foreign ministers for assistance and support might not be part of the political armor you receive in training for political office, but for international relations, such picking up of the phone is an indispensable art, and we had to learn how to remain in contact. I want to go back briefly to the year 2019. It was a year which signaled significant practical action in support of gender equality globally. In discussion with foreign ministers at the UN General Assembly in September 2019, we signaled 2020 as the year in which 20 years of the adoption of the resolution of Women, Peace and Security agenda would be recognized. We also acknowledged in 2019 that 2020 would signal 25 years since the Beijing platform of action, and of course would signal the beginning of the implementation of the Generation Equality Forum practical action. The UN Generation Equality Forum is, I believe, one of the most promising international women's agendas since the Beijing Platform for Action. It is made more important by the advocacy and leadership young women worldwide have taken up in it. These young women, civil society organizations, business leaders, supported by our own Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the Executive Director of UN Women, they've all decided they wish to be, these young women, the generation that concretizes the achievement of gender equality. Talking to them in September 2019, they boldly said to us, we don't want to be, when we are your age, talking about gender equality. We want to have achieved it. We are the generation equality leaders. The initiative through the Generation Equality Forum has highlighted important priorities while we grapple with COVID-19. As has been said by other speakers, gender-based violence and femicide emerged very clearly through the pandemic as global challenges that all societies have to combat effectively and in unity. In conversation with my colleagues in Chile and Mexico, I learned that gender-based violence had increased during lockdowns in their countries, just as it increased in our own country during the lockdown. We used our awareness of these matters and of the generation equality agenda to insert into the program of the African Union and the African response to COVID-19 while we served in 2020 as chair of the African Union. Working through the African Union and led by our President Ramaphosa, we developed a coordinated and coherent response to the pandemic that we ensured was consistently monitored, that we ensured involved all member states and kept them informed and involved by using all regional and continental structures on the continent. As chair of the African Union, South Africa also inserted the priority of a gender-based violence combat response by the African Union and placed this squarely as the responsibility of the heads of state and made this part of the AU agenda. We also promoted as South Africa the decade 2020 to 2030 as the decade of the financial inclusion of women in Africa, because we realized that the inequality that confronts women on a daily basis is very, very strongly tied to their unequal access and ownership and control of economic resources. And thus the financial inclusion of women is, we believe, an important part of what needs to be done in order to address the inequality that we are speaking of today. I refer to the Generation Equality Forum because internationally it is the agenda that has drawn the entire globe into the effort to combat gender inequality. All sectors in society are being addressed, all areas of social action, the practice of justice, access to education, equal labor law, access to information communication technology, and many other social sectors. The initiative is also, I believe, valuable in that it draws together the public, the private, and civil society sector and allows us to establish inclusive collaboration and to ensure that all role players make a contribution.
And the other day was when I saw Mr. Matsela Koko.
The levels of gender-based violence. If we do not incorporate all sectors in our society in fighting this particular blight, we will not succeed to reverse it and eradicate it. So all of us must be involved, and Generation Equality in its organizing and in its work asserts this. In our response to the pandemic, we also found, as we looked at ourselves as Africa, continentally, that our vulnerabilities were very, very openly exposed. And that we had clear indicators of areas that we need to address urgently in order to limit the vulnerabilities of the African continent. Our public health systems are weak and inadequate, and we have to find ways of supporting them through increased investment, through expanding the pool of well-trained health professionals, not just nurses and doctors, statisticians, data analysts, biotechnologists, a wide range of fields that many African young people are not yet involved in, needs to be the wide range of responses that our African governments secure the support of our universities in acting on and executing. We also, I believe, note and are aware, as this summit, that debates on treatments, diagnostics, protective equipment also exposed our inadequacies in production, in manufacturing, in research and innovation. And it is clear that for us, as women, as young people, as Africa, there is significant space for innovation capacity building on the African continent. International debates have signaled that vaccines, once produced, must become a public good, available to everyone equally. And yet we see the emerging vaccine nationalism, where countries have ordered triple the number of vaccines they will require to vaccinate the entire population, and where wealth has meant access, and poverty means inclusion. This vaccine nationalism and inequality directly says to Africa, we must never allow ourselves to be in a position where we rely on global goodwill to access new treatments or diagnostics. We need to develop our own capacity and learn to produce that which we need. If we do not do so, we will forever be vulnerable and dependent on others. Part of what our governments also had to do in the COVID-19 response was to develop emergency economic relief measures. And if we compare what we were able to do on the continent in comparison to our global partners, we would accept that as Africa, we had very little room for economic maneuver. So, for example, in South Africa and several other countries on the continent, while support was found for formal industries, for workers in formal employment, women who are in high-risk economic sectors were hard hit by inequitable access, in fact, no access to business relief, nor to financial sector support. Women in these sectors, who often provide a livelihood to their families that is absent from any other provider, found themselves totally invisible and marginalized as economic relief measures were devised. Women, as has been said, lost employment opportunities in larger numbers than men. And as the ILO has recently reported, the position of women as earners of a livelihood has been severely worsened by the pandemic. This is added to the burden of unpaid care work, unequal access to professional careers, and unequal pay for equal work for women. Leadership by us as political leaders, as business leaders, as diplomats, post the pandemic, requires focused attention to these forms of discrimination. I think time has come for us to no longer describe the problem, but to attend to it. Countries such as Spain, Norway, and Chile have passed laws that outlaw these abuses, and we should ensure women have similar protection in South Africa and on the African continent. In conversation with my colleague, women ministers in international relations, I asked them about how they address gender inequality. And they've given me a slew of legislation, of regulations that their countries adopt, the requirements for the private sector to ensure greater responsiveness, board membership requirements, and other laws that attend to the inequality all of us are speaking of today. I think as South Africa and as African women leaders, we need to address the nature of regulatory frameworks that support the achievement of equality for women. I also think we need to see greater women leadership in research, development, and innovation. More women in information technology. More women in sectors that are considered scarce skill areas that are often not a priority for women to play a role in or for them to take up study in. As vice chancellors, and I'm really excited about the vice chancellor of UNISA and the other women vice chancellors in our country, we should pay attention. How many women are there in engineering, in science, in information communication technology, and in economics? And post the bachelor's degree, where they do tend to be present, how many are present in honors programs, how many in masters, and how many proceed to the PhD? I think what the pandemic has taught us is that there are significant signs, evidence, enduring characteristics of inequality. But the fact that we were able to respond, the fact that the consequence on our continent wasn't as many believed it would be, means that there is a capability that we need to marshal in order to ensure we do effectively build the ability not to be at risk in future. And if we can do this, led by women, I believe we build a sustainable foundation for the future progress of the African continent. And I thank you very much, Program Director, for this opportunity. Thank you.
It's a massive acknowledgement and thank you to our Honorable Minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly allow me to apologize. We are running slightly behind schedule, so I'm going to exercise what I call my moderator superpowers. And what that means is that I'm going to change the program around a little bit. But what I do want to do is I do want to acknowledge a very special lady, a very special South African who's taken our brand to the global stage. Her name is Motsepe. She has put for us together a really amazing piece of entertainment that we're going to enjoy a little bit later. What we're going to do now is we're going to go into our parallel sessions. Now, if you're wanting to listen in and participate in the youth leadership conversation, that's going to be happening in this very room in plenary. So you're going to stay put and make sure that if you're on the app or if you're on the web browser, you are now clicking on the youth leadership session, which is where that session is going to be happening. However, if you are wanting to participate in the women leadership session, that is going to be happening in the room straight out of this main door, just on the other side of the corridor if you're with us physically. If you're with us online, on the app or on the web browser, all you need to do is just click on your schedule and click the women leadership session that's going to start shortly. So I hope those directions are clear. I'm not going to stay on this stage. I'm going to go join the women leadership panel on the other end, and I'm going to invite Tumelo to come back on stage as she moderates the youth leadership panel. I'll see you shortly. Thank you.
All right, we're going to come out of that Motsepe Foundation celebration of Independent Women's Day today. We're going to now go to the state capture. Of course, former Eskom CEO Brian Molefe is expected back at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture in Johannesburg today. Transnet CEO, he was... Okay.
Thank you so much to my partner for doing such a stellar job. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll just give those who would like to move just a few minutes, perhaps let me say a minute, 30 seconds, if you would like to join the Women in Leadership panel facilitated by my co-facilitator, Ms. Nozi Mbanjwa Shabalala. You may move to the plenary just behind this room, but if you would like to stay for the youth leadership plenary, whoop, whoop, you may stay behind. I'm not voting for my plenary session, by the way, because I know that we have other people, of course, joining us virtually. So please feel free to make use of the app where you can send through your questions, where you can send through your engagements, your comments, and we've got ample time with this one to just engage with you. So as I see people making their way, I'll be taking my seat, and then I will be inviting my panelists to come and join me. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. All right, if I may just begin with those who will be joining me in my session, please make your way to the front. We are joined in our youth leadership session by Ms. Lerato Ndlovu, the SRC president from the University of Pretoria. Lerato, if you may please come to the stage. Please give a warm round of applause. May I please invite Mr. Siyabulela Gentile, the founder and CEO of Not In My Name South Africa. Sir, may you please come to the stage. In our midst, we also have Ms. Zinhle Ramano, the founder and MD of BAAB Media. May you please come to the stage. We're also joined by Ms. Shudupadzo Musida, Miss South Africa for the year 2020. Please come to the stage. Last and definitely not least, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined virtually via Zoom by Ms. Shahira Kala, board member from Section 27. Ms. Kala, are you with us? Can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Awesomeness. Thank you so much, Shahira, for joining us. Wow, we're finally here. After the back and forth, checking if we're comfortable, we're happy, we're prepared. Thank you so much for making time this afternoon and joining us, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start this one, I suppose, let me see. Let me start this conversation with you, Zinhle, because, I remember when we were planning our session, I did make mention that, I was rather inspired in my prep by, or not necessarily inspired, but this is part of the research that I did. And I read up on Dr. C. Nicole Mason, who had termed the word she session. And I want to explain what this means, she session. She had said that COVID-19 is so historic in her point of view and unprecedented as neither the Great Depression nor the Great Recession has impacted women more. And hence she termed the word she session. And I suppose I wanted to start with this conversation with the economic impact of COVID-19 on women. How would you contextualize it for us?
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. First of all, I just want to say Happy International Women's Day to everyone in the room and to everyone who's at home watching virtually. I come to this panel as a millennial woman born in 1994, so they call us Born Frees. We're the first generation of Born Frees. And I was influenced by digital transformation with the birth of Facebook in 2004. 4 years later, you would then see the global recession that impacted us globally. And March 2020 would then mark the second financial global recession, which impacted millennials. So now when we look at what I've been saying is that 27% of millennials make up the South African population, and this then defines the buying power that we have here in South Africa. We have the biggest buying power according to this community in March 2020. So now I'm just going to bounce back to your question about the she session that is impacting us in this country. This she session has exacerbated existing issues that exist within South Africa, such as gender-based violence, which has been spoken about multiple times in this platform. So when it comes to solutions for the she session, it's a little bit of
a word,
alliteration.
Right? Yeah. Tongue twister.
So when we're looking at solutions for the she session, we need to be thankful for platforms such as the Motsepe Foundation, who promotes youth and women empowerment. There's also the wonderful ladies from International Women's Forum South Africa, who have partnered with the government with a GBV fund, which is brilliant. It's the first of its kind in South Africa. And also, you have platforms such as Young Leaders Connect, which is an IWFSA initiative of which I am a part of. I'm the head of digital conversations, and each month we have wonderful conversations about women empowerment and solutions that are needed in the country. And yes, I hope I've answered. Have I answered your question?
You have, absolutely. You have. And while you were talking, I'm reminded of what even the minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor, was saying about how young people want to get to a point where they're not just talking about the solutions, but not only have they achieved the solutions, but they reinforce them. And that's exactly why I think you being born in 1994, being a millennial yourself, being a business owner yourself, you're not just on this platform talking about what looks good on black and white in paper, but being that lived experience for us to take as an example of. But Shahira, if I may just come to you, I mean, the reason why I'd asked Zinhle this question is because I'm sure you can agree with me that COVID-19 has sort of exacerbated the gender parity gap. I mean, we're seeing so much inequality, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, the gap between men and women, whether we're talking about wage and, pay, equal rights, being given equal opportunities to be in the room, on the table, making those important decisions about a recovery plan. The facts are showing us that women are still at the back burner. How has COVID-19, in your opinion, set us back? And what do you think it would take to get to where we were, but also where we aim to be?
And I'm very happy to be joining all of you at this important event. I wish you all a beautiful and revolutionary International Women's Day. So to just begin to answer your question, I think it's very important to contextualize that the pandemic is not the problem here. Unfettered greed, corruption, and capitalism, in my opinion, are the biggest problems that we face as humanity right now. And a setback implies that we were on the right path to begin with. But were we on the right path before the pandemic? We need to consider the expanse of inequality in our country. So in terms of scale and time, there are 3 statistics that I want to share with you that, in my opinion, reflect that we were not on the right track, and we need to think of new ways to get there. The first is that the average South African CEO takes home as much as 461 black women from the bottom 10% earners in the country. The second is that the world's 22 richest men own more wealth than all the women in Africa. And lastly, it's reported that worldwide, women and girls perform 12.5 billion hours of unpaid labor every day. And Oxfam has calculated that this work adds $10.8 trillion to the economy every year, which is 3 times the size of the global tech industry. But to answer your question more directly, the pandemic has no doubt worsened things that were already unbearable and that were already unjust. We face a crisis upon a crisis. And the budget that we've seen our government put forward for 2021 reduces planned spending on public health by an unprecedented 50.3 billion over the next 3 years. The allocation to COVID-19 vaccines has come at the expense of other vital health services, including grants that affect women and caregivers. And only 5% of all African and colored youth enter and successfully complete university. So when we see a decrease in spending on NSFAS and on higher education, we also must realize that it's not only a lack of funding support, but also the necessary psychosocial support to get students through, especially with the changes to education and the landscape given COVID and virtual learning. Treasury has not given us any good answers on the limits of redistribution, when it comes to wealth taxes and other taxes which target the rich. And we need answers for this if we are to envision a feminist economy. Our biggest challenge is not that our leaders are driven by fear, but rather that they lack imagination. The austerity budget exists because we fear the strings that control the political and the economic budget and the economic status quo, which has birthed such mind-numbing inequality. And this fear robs us of the courage and the imagination to do things differently. So the fact that the NDP's target of a Gini coefficient of 0.6 by 2030 would still place South Africa and our income inequality at the highest in the world is a problem. 4 decades of liberal trade and financial policies racing to the bottom on corporate income and wealth taxes, a failure to invest in industrialization and infrastructure, and ongoing cuts to public services continues to limit the scope for a caring state that serves the majority of our people. So before we can say how long it will take us to recover, we must acknowledge that going back to yesterday's ideas will not solve today's problems.
Very important point you mentioned there, especially highlighting, Shahira, that where we were even pre-COVID was not ideal. And COVID-19 isn't necessarily the problem, but it has further exposed and I believe put a microscope on some of the issues that we have, whether it's our systems, our healthcare facilities, leadership in the country. And Siyabulela, I want to come to you with that being said. We've touched on the economic impact. We've touched on, just in terms of where we were as a country in terms of gender inequality and where we are now. But gender-based violence, again, being deemed that second pandemic. I mean, how do we actively address challenges in the country that infringe on the rights of women?
Thank you so much, Tumelo. Can I be allowed to refer to myself as a rose for today, seeing that I can't be a thorn. But I would even argue and say that, in fact, gender-based violence is actually the first pandemic in this country, and that COVID-19 is the second. But we need to start by appreciating the fact that women's rights are actually human rights, and that all individuals are equal on the basis of that they are human beings. By virtue of being human, you deserve the dignity that comes with that. But the lockdown measures, which have been very necessary, by the way, have had an extreme effect on the country's economic as well as social makeup. A lot of women have been forced, or rather they've been trapped with a lot of, or with their abusers for longer periods of time because of this. In Tshwane alone, by mid-April, the call center for GBV and femicide was receiving between 500 to 1,000 calls a day. It's a very huge number. The government femicide and GBV call center said that within the first 3 weeks of the hard lockdown, they had recorded over 120,000 victims. So that says to us we've got a problem. But now, coming to some of my recommendations, we must be confrontational yet measured in our response to violence against women. We need to continue, one, strengthening the criminal justice system and enhancing the policy framework. We need to start seeing people going to prison, whether you are a celebrity, whether you are famous, or whatever. We need effective rehabilitation programs that will run concurrently with these harsher sentences. And those of us who are working on the ground as civil society movements, we need to intensify our education and prevention programs. And lastly, we need a gender-sensitive and a gender-focused policies and programs that can further enable girls as well as women to participate or to realize their full economic potential. We must disrupt and challenge the crimes on women and their rights, not, which is very important, not by problematizing men, but by recommitting our collective efforts, all of us, to dismantling the systemic organization that is deeply entrenched in patriarchy, that continues to put men at the top of the social hierarchy and women at the bottom.
And that speaks to the theme for today, harnessing that role that women can play as part of the economic recovery plan, but also not just in a pre or during or post-COVID era time, but even for future generations to come. Women need to play that central role. Lerato, I want to come to you. You're the SRC president of the University of Pretoria. I mean, I can imagine right now, we cannot have this discussion whether it affects women or men, but it affects the youth, it affects students. We can't have a conversation without addressing some of those challenges that students are facing right now. I mean, when it comes to registration at institutions of higher learning, affordability, access to basic needs to be able to learn conducively. Just paint a picture of what the youth of this country is currently going through.
Good afternoon to everyone, and happy International Women's Day to all the women who are watching and all who are here. And thank you for the platform. You have spoken correctly that we cannot have this conversation in the absence of addressing issues that speak directly to the youth as a whole in this country. And it also speaks to how our issues are being addressed. So if we take the big issue right now is with student finances, student access to education, not having money, taking into consideration that near majority of our country lives in poverty or near poverty. So taking that into consideration, looking at the expenses, the prices, all the finances that go behind accessing education, and how this is being addressed. As the youth, there's a lot of anger from our side. If we look back at last year with the budget cuts of education, that was very concerning, as it shows the posture that our government has to education. Education has become an expense and not an investment for our government, and that is the issue that we are having. Thus, the reluctancy. We see the reluctancy even with the National Fund, NSFAS, with assisting students with money. They keep trying to cut courses, and the delay in giving students money to actually get education shows the posture of our government in this. And as the youth, as we sit right now, there's a heavy anger within us, because this is quite evident in how we are being addressed when it comes to finances and accessing education, and their lack of, for majority of South Africans who don't have that money. So as we are continuing with this conversation, we should also take into consideration and try to brainstorm how we can change this posture and how we can find solutions around this. Because this is also another huge case, a pandemic, let's call it, that students don't have access to education because of lack of funding, and our government is not acting correctly or acting and treating this as with a matter of urgency that it is.
Yeah. Interestingly, I mean, Lerato, I had a conversation with a representative from an organization called Ignition this morning, and one of the things they highlighted is that today, marking it, the first day for some institutions of higher learning for first years to make their way to school, some of them are not registered, some of them don't have funding. There's a lot of anxiety, almost sort of like triggering their mental health. And Shudu, that's where I would like you to come in, because it seems students are in a very discouraged mental state right now, because the majority of them come from previously disadvantaged backgrounds. They cannot register. But when you look at the holistic society in our country, this past year alone has been quite a journey. The loss of loved ones, losing of jobs, wearing masks, where you feel that your freedom has almost been compromised. Paint us that picture, just with the work that you do in association with SADC, where you do speak to some South Africans about this issue.
Thank you for this amazing platform, and happy International Women's Day to all of us present and everyone watching. I think you've painted the right picture of where we are at currently in terms of the mental health state of so many South Africans. Mental health does not discriminate. It literally affects kids as young as 2 and as old as 80 or even older. And I think a lot of people are dealing with a lot. They're suffering the constant anxiety of wondering whether or not today is the day you get the virus, or you're going to hear that a loved one has passed away, or you're wondering where your next income is going to come from. I think all of us are actually holding in our breath until it's safe again to breathe. And that's literally the current state of mental health in the country right now. The messages I've been getting because of Mindful Mondays, you get people that are very discouraged, a lot of young people in fact, but then there are issues of accessibility and affordability that currently exist in our country, whereby people are not getting the help that they need, or they're not even sure how to get the help that they need. SADC has reported that the number of calls that they've received during the lockdown was double what they usually receive. And that paints a picture of where we are at and how much people need help even though they don't know how to get it.
Yeah.
And we need to get to a point where, as young people, especially now, there are so many pressures, irrespective of the pandemic, to succeed, especially women to succeed, to have an idea of or account for the future when you don't even know if tomorrow is going to be your last day. And that's where we're at, and we need to get to a point where we say it's okay to not be okay, it's okay to seek help, but also address the issues of accessibility and affordability in that regard, and also say that we are all in this together. Just as we are preparing or gearing up for the physical healing of our nation or the economic healing of our nation, it's also quite important to put mental health at the forefront, because if the mind is conquered, we can't go anywhere. The mind is the powerhouse, so if you're trying to make people succeed, if you're trying to get people to practice agency, if you're trying to cultivate an entrepreneurial mindset in order to curb issues that existed prior to COVID, such as unemployment rates, 1 in 3 people expected to suffer from mental illnesses in their lifetime, gender inequality, we need to start with the mind. We need to start with the minds of every single individual in South Africa, or globally in fact, and say that, listen, okay, if we're trying to move forward, let's start by addressing issues that exist, which are mental health issues, but then is often disregarded and not held in the same regard as physical health, even though both of them are interlinked.
Very interesting. You mentioned, Shudu, that nothing else will be effective if your mental health is not in check, if it's not healthy, if it's not fit. And I think that's one thing that sometimes we forget when we're in the busyness of life, that we're trying to get everything covered, forgetting that it starts with a powerful tool, which is your mind. As mentioned before, you're more than welcome to send through your questions. You can go to our platform on CVent and go to our event, 5th GWAS Summit. And on the platform, you're able to send through some questions. And I don't want to take up much of time in terms of asking the questions that I pray, but also invite you, whether at home, in your office, in our room, to ask some of the questions that you asked. And I have one which has been sent to me. And Shahira, this question is actually directed to you. And this question reads, currently, in the NDP issued, or rather, the NDP issued invitations for members to be on NDP committee, and youth is mentioned. What is your view of including more youth in NDP to ensure that youth are integral to planning? Shahira, are you with us? All right, I cannot hear Shahira at this moment. I'm not sure if your audio is muted, and perhaps you can hear me, but I'm going to move on to the next panelist, Shahira, while we try and sort out your audio technical glitches. But I want to then redirect this next question that I'm seeing here, which comes from, well, it doesn't say, but it speaks to GBV. And Siyabula, perhaps you can assist us, and perhaps if you want to jump in, panelists, please do so. But it's on GBV. And this comment or question says that GBV does... on GBV, does this exclude men abused by women, or everyone abused is inclusive? And I also agree with Sia. They're saying we need to see everyone paying for their crimes, be it someone in power, a celebrity, or just an ordinary South African from our society. Your view, please.
Yes. In fact, we've had a lot of resistance from men in our discussions around gender-based violence on that point, whereby they will say that in fact, you guys must change this GBV thing, because this is about women. When you open up your mouth here, you want to defend women. But gender-based violence, that's what it is. And then gender includes males as well. And it is from that view that we need to start having discussions and the conversation around the differences in gender relations. We must talk about the imbalances of power. We must talk about the system that I mentioned earlier, which is patriarchy. We must talk about even men being abused by women. And in our discussions, we always encourage men to speak out. And unfortunately, the conversations that we are having as men amongst ourselves, they are sometimes so toxic that rajutana, it's say, you'd have things like a man in the if you talk about those things, and then we end up being frustrated and becoming more violent. But in essence, gender-based violence refers to violence that is meted by either men or women against the opposite sex. It's different from femicide. Femicide refers to women being killed by their intimate partners, partner femicide. But our conversation needs to include both males and females. That is the only way we are going to get rid of gender-based violence.
I want to also bring an economic element to this as well. To you especially, Zinhle, being that you're an entrepreneur, I know that most of you on this panel are entrepreneurs, or at least in business or in relations with corporates in your own right. But Zinhle, with the issue of even violence, I know that we often read of women's stories saying we are forced to stay in relationships because perhaps the man, provides financially. There's that economic relationship between the man and the woman, and therefore, if I leave, what happens to my kids? The World Bank had released a report that over 70% of informal work in the sub-Saharan region alone is occupied by women, and therefore they were heavily impacted by COVID-19. And I suppose my question to you is that, what are some of the strategies and solutions you think we can start with in addressing women being more economically empowered, young women being economically empowered? We're seeing young women also getting into the gig economy, trying to make a living for themselves on the likes of social media. But what are some of your solutions or suggestions?
Okay, thank you for that question, Ms. Dumelo. We live in a country where the unemployment rate is at 28%, and women form 34% of that unemployment rate. And I think when we want to translate stats and try to make sense of them, I like going back to the phrase of, when you educate a woman, you educate a nation. So I grew up in a matriarchal household where my mother was, the breadwinner. And I've seen the impact that has, when you have a woman in power, empowering other women, me coming as a girl child. So going back to your question in terms of gender-based violence impacting women who don't have economic freedom to leave that situation, I think it comes back down to resources and tools that are available for women, either to seek shelter, to have access to education, to have access to eventually becoming a woman in power, whereas you are not confined to the restriction of being with your perpetrator. And I also want to speak about basically how this pandemic has exacerbated not only GBV, but this is a separate topic, but digital transformation. So when it comes to the informal workers that you're asking about, these are our street vendors, our domestic workers, and other people who basically provide vital services within South Africa. Do they have tools and resources to things like digital transformation, which may and probably will affect their businesses in future? And I think the solution always comes back to education is the solution for economic recovery.
Absolutely. And speaking of those solutions, if I may come to you, Lerato, again, you mentioned earlier on that we need to come up with solutions. We need tangible results and solutions which will drive change in our community, particularly for the youth. Because as cliches may sound that the youth are future leaders, it is true. They need the support now so that they can be better equipped to lead tomorrow. And I suppose my question to you is then, how do we assist young people who are about to enter into institutions of higher learning, students that need to navigate their journey into making sure that, they finish up, their courses, they do well, and don't fall into the trap of the employability vacuum, because I'm sure you've seen some of the unemployment statistics are quite staggering, and youth unemployment is right there.
Thank you very much for that question. And I love the finishing statement of the importance of education, especially in our nation. Just to highlight a couple of things to do with the success and the success of a student in this country. has many aspects, and it also includes what Shudu mentioned earlier, is the mental health of students, the finance, which I mentioned earlier, and the overall support, academic support for students. So just now to give context of where we find ourselves with the pandemic, we found ourselves in a situation where students were forced into online learning, and I use the word forced rightfully so, as students were told to leave their residential areas, their accommodations, and go back home, forgetting what home is for majority of South Africans. What home is for a lot of South Africans of the working class is an unstable environment where there is no place for conducive learning, forgetting that home for some students, it is no food, no hunger at home, forgetting all of these things. And the first thing that we need to do is firstly acknowledge that we need to acknowledge what happened during this time. We need to acknowledge all this damage that has been done. And in acknowledging that, we need to find a way to take students out of that environment. So for students who were sent home, the institution should be prioritizing these students for them to come back to environments where it's conducive for learning. And also the strengthening of mental health of students within South Africa. That is a topic that has not been taken seriously because of our history as a people. We're only taking it seriously now, and it needs to be championed more, that they should be providing a space or utilities and resources for student mental health. Then the one that I mentioned in the beginning, finances, there needs to be a prioritization of finances for students to get education. It shouldn't be a thing of it's a favor that we are giving students resources to go to university. It's not a favor, it's not a privilege, it's a fact, it's a right. We are supposed to get educated in order for this country to move. So those are the 3 points which, to answer your question of how we can help our students in this nation, is firstly the mental health, and secondly the finances of actually getting students fees to actually continue with their studies, and finally getting students out of some students are still online learning. We're about to start with online learning, and still students are not back. So just taking students out of those situations and bringing them back, yes, enforcement of COVID measures, but the notion of online learning and having students in environments which are not conducive is also very criminal to the student body.
Absolutely. And, placing young people at the center of those decisions being made is quite crucial. I think for the fact that we have student bodies like the Student Representative Council to challenge management, to challenge government, to ensure that, you can express what students need because that's what your lived experience is important.
Yes, and what you mentioned there with having the student body actually challenge management is that we are also in a very compromised situation as students, is that, yes, we were sent home. Now, how students usually mobilize is students come to the ground, mobilize, and that was taken from us. That was our voice and our means to get through and be heard. Now that was taken away from us by COVID and being sent back home. And now we have to consider that as you're sending us home, there are no resources for online activism for majority of South African students. So now this has left the student body voiceless. And again, it's this brewing anger that is building up, and we need to address it. The government needs to address it properly. And not only government, but institutions too should also be at the forefront of providing for students.
Absolutely. And with that being said, I just want to check if Shahira is still with us. Shahira, are you still with us? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Sorry, I dropped off for a bit, but I'm back online.
I'm glad you're back with us, Shahira. And what Lerato is saying goes back to a question we received from our esteemed audience members. One of them asked whether you think that the NDP committee needs the presence of young women there, so that they can also express some of these challenges that they're facing and bring in their suggestions to be tabled. Because if we're talking about harnessing the role of women as part of the economic recovery plan, shouldn't young people also be front and center of this recovery plan? Shouldn't they also be in these rooms to sort of table what the lived experiences of the youth is?
Absolutely. For me, what's quite puzzling is how we tend to separate youth from broader issues within society, when the focus on youth and on the future needs to be embedded very precisely in every single thing we think about, in every single strategy that we come up with. Frankly, there's no recovery without women and girls. And I think what this current moment says about us, when we have a budget that is literally taking food out of the poorest mouths while giving tax breaks to the rich, and when we see we see that we need skills, like the SRC president has mentioned, but we're cutting spending to higher education to bail out SAA. These are things that should be fundamentally unconstitutional. And if our parliament represents the people, it cannot accept this budget. This is an immediate intervention that we can all make to refuse the austerity budget right now, and to also acknowledge that the meager 500 Rand top-ups to caregiver grants and old age pensions that were terminated last year need to be reinstated. The NIDS-CRAM survey showed us that 1 in 6 households with children reported that a child had gone hungry in the last week. And in this formulation, really, women are not only expected to take care of children, but they're also punished for being caregivers. And it is unacceptable that women do not qualify for the 350 Rand COVID Social Relief of Distress grant. Further unacceptable that that grant will be terminated in April. That budget that we've seen has made no mention of basic incomes, when we know that basic incomes are an immediate way to deal with abject poverty in South Africa. So my closing sentiment to everyone here is that holistically building a feminist economy means that we are open to creativity and to coordinated approaches to our problems. And yes, this includes youth being involved in decision-making spaces. But a no-brainer, in my opinion, is the demand for basic income guarantee. The merits of a big have been well documented. The myth of a deserving poor and the myth of dependency are long over. Contrary to stereotypes of laziness, grants actually have been important in supporting job seeking, for example, by paying for childcare or transport for caregivers, or to buy stock to establish and run small businesses. So over and above this, evidence also shows that at the right level, at the high enough level, grants could actually increase aggregate demand, having a multiplier and stimulus effect for our economy. So we're really selling ourselves short and putting livelihoods at risk by not analyzing this in depth, and also not understanding that when we say basic income guarantees, we mean that everyone has a social and moral right to dignity and to the economy. We need to rethink what the economy is actually meant for, because currently it's not serving the people. So what is it serving? Who is it serving? We need to see universal basic income guarantees as a bridge. They're not our end goal, they're not the solution, but a universal basic income guarantee is something that we can use to organize and build a better world.
Right.
So while growing the economy, the core focus cannot be on just growth in and of itself. It needs to be improving the lives of South Africans and everyone who lives in South Africa. So I want to conclude with this quote from a feminist scholar and trade unionist, Rose Schneiderman, who implored us 100 years ago to think about this, that women do not just want the right to exist. They want the right to live. They do not just want bread, they want roses too. And why should they not have these roses? So the concluding thought on gender-based violence particularly is that even the Gender Commission has said that by terminating the COVID grants last year, the government has put women at risk. And this is an urgent issue that we need to address. The COVID grant needs to include women, or the caregiver grant needs to be instated.
Thank you so much, Shahira, for that point and for those closing remarks. Shudu, I have to end with you, and I suppose your closing remarks are quite important, because I will reiterate that, as you mentioned before, the most important tool, the most important engine for this conversation to be effective, for all the points that have been listed by our panelists in terms of implementation is concerned, to be effective, starts with mental fitness. And we have been through so much. Shudu, I've been through so much. You've been through a lot. Our panelists have been through so much. South Africans in the world over have been through a lot in this past year alone. Give us some advice and tips in terms of how you feel we can effectively move forward in terms of ensuring that we are mindful of our mental health and we are mentally fit and healthy, but also utilize social media for good and not to further add fuel that sets us back.
So being mentally fit is actually an important tool right now during COVID, because how your mental state determines your outlook on life and how you receive things, and how you receive things will determine the decisions that you make. So that could actually change the whole trajectory of your life. So it's quite important for us to be in a space where we are mindful of everything that is happening within us. I call it checking in. So it's quite important to check in. So you're going to have a bad day, right? But a bad day does not mean a bad life. And you must remember that you must be in a space where you prioritize positivity. In as much as we're in the midst of a pandemic, we need to prioritize positivity, because a positive and a negative thought cannot exist in the same mind at the same time. It doesn't work like that. So it's quite important for us to be in a space where we are very mindful of how we're feeling and how we receive things in our outlook on life, because that's going to determine the rest of our lives. So the advice that I can give to people right now is to remember to celebrate the small wins. I think we saw it with the matrics of 2020. There was a 76.2 pass rate, and most people were just focusing on the 23.8 that didn't make it. But then we need to remember that we're living through a pandemic, and like she was saying, we were forced to go to online learning. I was one of the students who was part of that.
Right.
And trying to being expected to show up, being expected to still receive the same marks and still receive the same pass rate as 2018, for example, is unfair. So we need to learn to be kind to one another and celebrate the small wins. We ought to be proud of the matrics who made it, and even those that didn't make it, because it was a very, very rough time for all of us. So right now, I implore people to practice agency, to practice agency, to be mindful of how they're feeling, but also just to celebrate the small wins, because they build up momentum to the bigger wins. The first thing that I heard during the pandemic, as you rightfully said, we all have been through so much. I was struggling with anxiety, and my therapist told me to focus on the small wins, because they build up momentum to the bigger wins. So waking up during a pandemic is a victory. Taking a walk is a victory. Cooking is a victory. My therapist told me, study for an hour. If you can't do 2 hours, it's fine in the beginning, because I couldn't. It was too much. And eventually that built up momentum to be able to do more things, to achieve more, because you are in that mind state of winning, in that mind state of celebrating the victories that are in your life, and that actually gives you hope for more. So I think it's quite important for us to just be kind to ourselves and just be cognizant of the fact that we are living through a pandemic, and it's quite important to celebrate the small wins, even if it's just getting out of bed some days, because it's hard for so many people. People have lost loved ones, jobs, livelihoods. People are even struggling to register into university. The very same thing that's supposed to make our lives better, the very same tool that is supposed to change everything for us, but then we are being denied access to that because of finances and all those kinds of things. So in going through all of that, remember to just be kind to yourself and just celebrate the small wins in your life.
Shuduphatso Mzila, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Zinka Ramon, a pleasure talking to you as well. Siabula Gentile, you were the rosiest thorn amongst the roses. Thank you so much for your time. Raton Glovu, a pleasure talking to you, ma'am. And Shahira Kala, virtually joining us. Thank you so much for your time. Esteemed panelists, I appreciate your input in this conversation. I hope that you have taken something that you can apply to your life, that you can share with your family, friends, and loved ones. And thank you so much for engaging with us, as well as those who are in the room. We'll take a short break, a light entertainment for a few minutes, and my co-facilitator, Nozipa, and I will be back. Thank you so much.
What?
phezulu kunakile
ubumhlaba kungehlule impilo le ayikho lula sungama ngiyasikunakele Dukuthelo yakhe ngaphezulu kunakele ubumhlaba kungehlule impilo le ayikho lula Folo moya wami uyafisa ukwenza kahle ubumhlaba kungehlule Folo moya wami uyafisa ukwenza kahle impilo le ayikho lula Dukuthelo yakhe ngaphezulu kunakele ubumhlaba kungehlule impilo le ayikho lula sungama ngiyasikunakele Dukuthelo yakhe ngaphezulu kunakele ubumhlaba kungehlule impilo le ayikho lula
When I wrote the song, I was actually talking to God, asking for forgiveness. As we all know, we've lost so many lives because of COVID-19. I hope wherever he is, he heard my prayer. Hold.
Ukwenza kahle ubumhlaba kungehlule Folo moya wami uyafisa ukwenza kahle impilo le ayikho lula Xola moya wami Xola moya wami Xola moya wami Hey kunakele Dukuthelo yakhe ngaphezulu kunakele ubumhlaba kungehlule impilo le ayikho lula
Ladies and gentlemen, if we could kindly ask you to please kindly take your seats. We are now resuming with the tail end of our program, our closing sequence. If I might kindly request for you to all kindly please take your seats. If you can hear our voice and you're in the passageway, this is a kind request for you to kindly please take your seat. And of course, if you're in the room with us, if you could indulge us just for 2 minutes by please taking your seat. Tumelo.
Yes, absolutely. You know, just to reflect briefly, because I know that, you know, you missed out on the youth leadership panel, I missed out on the women leadership panel, but that's why we have each other, so we can brief each other. Quite an eye-opener of, you know, the panelists that we had, Nozipo, speaking about the role that youth need to play as part of the economic recovery role, mental health being a big one for Sherifa Zomzida, the economic recovery plan coming from Zinhle Ramano, but also touching on what students are going through right now, as today is the first day for some institutions of higher learning in terms of students going back to school.
Fantastic. So that sounded like a really, really meaningful conversation. I think just to raise some of the points that were had in the women leadership conversation, a massive conversation about women who show up as men when they find themselves in leadership. And so this whole idea of being a pseudo-man and how we as women need to be more deliberate about as we navigate our way through leadership and as we find ourselves in leadership positions, to stay true to what it means to be a woman in leadership and to have the courage to rewrite the rules so that it works for women and not become men when we get there. I thought that was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
The second of 3 points was, the second one was really about how women in leadership we've seen traditionally don't last because the environment can become so toxic, and we had some real examples of women who've gotten all the way to deputy president, to the head of the international organizations, to say that when women are in those positions, how do we support them better so that they're not eliminated and filtered out by the system, which typically happens. And last but not least, we closed off the conversation on the point of being assertive and resilient. And that when they say that you're a bully and they say that you're being aggressive, stand your ground and just be assertive and get the job done. So that was the big conversation happening in the women leadership session, which was really, really incredible. So I think you missed out just a little bit.
Just a little bit. But you know what? I was with the fire panelists, of course, right here saying that we don't want to talk about it. As you know, the minister, Minister Naledi Pandor said, we don't want to keep talking about it. We want to be the change that we want to see. And there needs to come a time where we see everything we're talking about being implemented. So it was just, you know, quite encouraging and motivating being amongst young people that want to be the change they want to be. But you know what, Nozi, there's still lots more to come.
Absolutely. There's still lots to come. And with that, I'm going to leave Dumelo to take care of you on stage. Thank you so much for having me. And happy International Women's Day. And I hope you continue to celebrate. Over to you, Dumi.
Thank you so much, my co-facilitator. Well, ladies and gentlemen, both joining us here physically at the Sandton Convention Center and those who are joining us virtually, we're still commencing with our program. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our next speaker who's here on this International Women's Day to continue giving us some words of encouragement, highlighting some of the facts and realities affecting you and I as women in this country. Please help me welcome, of course, joining us via Zoom, Ms. Naros Bekele Thomas, the UN Resident Coordinator in South Africa.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Can you hear me?
Ms. Bekele Thomas, we can hear you. You may commence. Thank you, ma'am, for your time.
Thank you.
Ms. Bekele Thomas, if you can hear me, it's Dumelo Motutwani, the Program Director. If you can hear me, ma'am, you may commence. I think your audio is muted, ma'am. May you kindly unmute your audio so that we may hear you on our side.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you, ma'am. You may proceed. Ms. Bekele Thomas, this is Dumelo speaking. If you can hear me, we can hear you. You may proceed, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I mean, I've been waiting for a long time, so, you know, I think even the computer is not collaborating. Thank you, Program Director, Her Excellency, the First Lady of Rwanda, and founder and chairperson of Imbuto Foundation. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Honorable Ministers Maite Nkwana Mashabane and Dr. Naledi Pandor, as well as Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe, our host, and heads of corporates and organizations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to stand on the shoulders of the preceding speakers and say all protocols observed. It's an honor to address this important gathering and would like to congratulate the Motsepe Foundation for bringing us together to pause and reflect on the implications of women taking on multiple roles in both public and private life. I grew up with mothers saying to their children, "I'm not an octopus," because much is expected of them as leaders in their occupations and in equal measure as caregivers and nurturers on the home front. As if it's not already enough, the COVID-19 pandemic, as we have all acknowledged, has added to this burden of care. The Financial Times survey indicates that the pandemic has forced parents into an impossible juggling act between career and childcare, and 2 in 5 working mothers are considering taking a step back at work. At the same time, as we just heard from all speakers, the pandemic has also amplified the need for feminist leadership and women's participation to ensure that the needs of women and those of marginalized groups are met. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that women are the engines of transformation. Women are the change agents. And during COVID-19, women heads of government in many countries, New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Denmark, to name a few, did not only institute measures to flatten the curve for long periods, but have consistently demonstrated passion, compassion, and transparency throughout the response. However, we need more women heads of states and governments. Currently, 119 countries have never had a woman leader, and at this pace, to reach parity, it will take another 130 years. Furthermore, women occupy only a quarter of parliaments in the world and are a lot less represented in corporate boardrooms and other areas of public life. We also know that the increase in numbers has not translated to gender equality, and in some cases, there are several steps back. Therefore, as women's role evolves, it is critical to create an enabling environment for women's empowerment in a holistic manner, and we need to budget accordingly. The 3 aspects of empowerment, social, economic, and political rights, must be recognized and promoted as an integrated whole. If one aspect fails, the full empowerment cannot be realized, and the whole sustainable development future is jeopardized. Having said that, like you, Dr. Precious Motsepe, we at the UN believe that women's economic empowerment could be the locomotive for fulfilling other forms of women's rights, economic, social, and political rights. It is one of the most promising areas of investment with incredibly high economic and societal dividends. And we therefore join you in your efforts to fight for youth and women entrepreneurship and enterprise development at national and local levels, and our support will be geared, among others, to building business solution and innovation centers in all districts to uplift youth and women in the rural and metropolitan areas. It is, ladies and gentlemen, proven that if women and men have equal access to land, technology, financial services, education, and markets, the consequent 20 to 30% increase in agricultural production on women's farms could lead 100 to 150 million less hungry people. If women and men stood on identical footing in terms of participation in the economy through paid work and entrepreneurship, the world could see as much as $28 trillion in global growth by 2025. Imagine that. It would be the GDP of US and China all put together. In concluding, as we build back better and accelerate efforts for pandemic recovery, I would like to pitch for investment in youth and women's economic empowerment as it is a force multiplier for good governance, economic growth, poverty eradication, ending hunger, and achieving food security and nutrition, sustainable consumption and production patterns, and environmental sustainability. And, of course, SDG achievement overall. We need to commit to gender equality for the sake of our children and the generations to come. As I said at the JSE even this morning, it is time to break and demolish the chain of generational inequality. Let us together build generation equality as alluded by the Minister Naledi Pandora, which is the guiding light into the future we want. I thank you.
Thank you so much. A warm round of applause for, of course, Ms. Bekele Thomas, the UN resident coordinator in South Africa. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your points. And, what I got, from your holistic approach to how to address women issues being that we need to enable women. We need to enable women economic empowerment, because when that is done, you enable not only economic empowerment, but social empowerment, political empowerment, and holistically, women are indeed empowered. Now, my next speaker, of course, recorded a video for us to, of course, address this International Women's Day. His name is Mr. Daniel Minele, the Group CEO of Absa Bank. But before I, of course, allow my esteemed, colleagues, my technical team at the back to play the video, I would like us to spare a moment of silence. As you know, the Absa Bank is in mourning after the announcement yesterday of the passing of their Deputy CEO, Ntate Peter Matlare. May we please spare just a few seconds, moment of silence, and send our condolences to his family, his loved ones, and his colleagues. Ntate Matlare, may your soul rest in peace. With that being said, please help me welcome Mr. David Minele, the Group CEO of the Absa Bank.
Thank you, Program Director. All protocol observed. Good morning to you all. It is a privilege for me to offer some remarks for the 5th Gender Equality, Wellness and Leadership Summit under the theme, Harnessing the Role of Women in Pandemic Recovery. I'd like to begin by thanking the Motsepe Foundation for rallying together stakeholders from different spheres of our society to share insights about the role that women can play in post-pandemic recovery. Beyond the immediate need to find medical solutions to fight the pandemic, we must also collectively take steps to ensure an inclusive and sustainable economic recovery. Thus, prioritization for women must be reflected in policy responses and business strategies, including efforts to support women's financial resilience, to enable their recovery from COVID-19 and other associated economic challenges. Now, more than ever, there is an urgent need for inclusive growth that will generate jobs. Governments on the continent must therefore undertake urgent structural reforms to facilitate higher and more inclusive growth. The recovery must prioritize labor-intensive sectors like tourism and agriculture, where there is more potential for people to get jobs. For their part, businesses must use this opportunity to harness their resources and expertise to support an inclusive economic recovery. Businesses must enhance efforts to rebuild new, inclusive economies by supporting local entrepreneurs, investing in innovative ideas, and creating employment for young people and women. According to the United Nations Global Compact, workplaces still have structural, cultural, and unconscious barriers that continue to hinder women's rights and contributions to the economy, sustainable development, productivity, and performance. As a financial services and banking sector, we need to consciously and specifically provide instruments and products that accommodate women empowerment. At a basic level, evidence suggests that better and more meaningful financial inclusion contributes towards reducing gender inequality. Numerous studies have shown that women who have access to bank accounts, saving mechanisms, and other financial services may be able to better control their earnings and undertake personal productive expenditures. Women who have financial means also have more options to leave abusive relationships and thus experience reduced exposure to intimate partner violence. Furthermore, the International Finance Corporation estimates that over 70% of women-owned small and medium enterprises globally have inadequate access to financial services. Digital financial inclusion is creating new economic opportunities for women in sub-Saharan Africa. These platforms have the potential to overcome restrictions brought about by geography, reduce the transaction costs of using financial services, enhance transparency, and therefore increase trust in financial systems. As I approach the end of my remarks, allow me to share what we have been doing at ABSA. Some progress has been made to improve gender parity in the workplace through the introduction of policies on diversity, equal opportunities, and remuneration. As of December 2019, 61.4% of employees at all levels within ABSA were female. 53% of new hires were female, and again 60.3% of employees promoted across the group were female. We also recently pledged a financial donation of 10 million rands to the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa to support the implementation of the National Strategic Plan and the wider GBVF response in the country. We completed a gender equality gap analysis guided by the UN Global Compact. The tool is based on the Women Empowerment Principles and explores organizational readiness in areas such as pay parity, strategy, marketing, and diverse representation. We also launched a South African hashtag Stop Gender-Based Violence campaign on our outdoor media, social media, TV, and radio. We also launched a women's manifesto comprising 11 declarations that cultivate a move towards a more inclusive workplace. The first one of these is a commitment by the ABSA leadership to prioritize gender equality as a key strategic lever. Furthermore, our Code of Ethics and group-wide people standards outline required conduct and actions in response to discrimination or harassment. Our employee wellness program offers counseling, therapy, and other support for working women, such as nursing pods. As ABSA Group, we are strongly committed to gender equality, both as part of the broader environmental, social, and corporate governance agenda, as well as part of the quest to achieve transformation. We are committed to integrating sustainability principles across our businesses and thus support our clients, customers, and stakeholders in their quest for sustainability in their own unique journeys. I'd like to conclude by thanking the Motsepe Foundation again for playing a very significant role in maintaining the spotlight on such an important subject. Everyone has a role to play in promoting gender equality in our homes, workplaces, and communities. I wish the Foundation all the best with the rest of today's program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Daniel Minele, the Group CEO of ABSA Bank. Thank you so much for sharing words of encouragement. Not only that, but also steps with which the ABSA Group has committed to taking, one of which I have noted, adhering to the SDG number 5 for gender equality. It's a priority for the organization. Of course, Mr. Minele also speaking about how financial literacy is important for women, the role of business with which they can play to support entrepreneurs, to support SMMEs, to further support communities is noted. And also the campaign with which he shared with us today to stop gender-based violence. I think it's quite important to see big, influential, powerful corporates such as ABSA Bank committing to stopping gender-based violence. Ladies and gentlemen, This is almost where we come to the end of our program for this afternoon. But before we do, I would like you to please assist me wherever you are, virtually or with us physically in the room, to help welcome back, of course, to give the closing remarks and to acknowledge each and every one of you for making this event a success and sending that message very strongly for the whole entire world to know that women indeed are taking charge in harnessing their own role for economic recovery. Of course, I would appreciate it if you could help me welcome back to the stage, of course, the co-founder of the Motsepe Foundation, that is Dr. Precious Moloi Motsepe.
Well. Good afternoon. And let me start off by asking all of you to please, virtually, wherever you are in the room, give a big round of applause for our facilitators, Tumelo Mototwana and Nozi Pombanjwa. They've been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Young women who really show leadership and also challenge us not to take gender equality for granted. So I also want to thank every one of you that have joined us virtually. Please don't leave. There's going to be entertainment after this. We've got yoga, sauna. We've got yoga. Pull out your map at home and make sure that you really deep breathe, de-stress, and look after yourself. And secondly, we've got Chef Coco, who I personally worked with to prepare amazing meals for you. And you can do this at home because the meals are very, very easy to prepare. So I'd like to encourage you to keep watching the rest of the program. And please also join me as I thank Madam Kagame in Rwanda, who gave us really, really good advice on how Rwanda has performed from the Holocaust to where they are now, where they are top in the World Economic Forum's Gender Parity Index. I'd like to thank Minister Maite Mashabane Ngwane. I'd like to thank Ms. Naledi Pandor. They brought in a political angle to how the issue of gender equality should be facilitated. I really particularly also liked the way Ms. Naledi Pandor dealt with the issue of international relations and the issue of women, gender equality, as well as just maintaining the relationships with countries, with people, to make sure that you achieve your goals. We went through panels that looked at issues of health. I must say, as a doctor, I was very, very excited to hear the tips that came from the panel relating to COVID-19, but also just relating to women's health in general. I'd like to encourage you every year to make sure that you make time to have yourself checked for cancer, hypertension, diabetes, and make sure that members, members of your family also have those tests. This does not exclude the men that are sitting in the audience. You also need to have yourselves checked. If you're not looking after yourself, as they say, when we used to fly, and then you'd see that air hostess, and she would tell you, before you put somebody else's mask who's sitting next to you, put your own mask on first. That's how important it is to look after your health. We've had wonderful panels. The one on leadership with a panel that was truly amazing and really digging deep and challenging women to actually stand up and lead authentically. We don't want to imitate aggressive leadership that we see that has been built in the corporate world. Bring in your own authentic leadership. and challenge the status quo. We also had a young, very dynamic team of leaders who are looking at how they are going to change the form of leadership and relationships between men and women as leaders, the generation equality that the minister spoke about earlier. I'm really excited because out of this dark cloud of COVID-19, we have some silver linings. And we've seen how, by just coming together, sharing knowledge, we've been able to find solutions to problems that we think are insurmountable. I'd like to encourage you also to please, wherever you are, whether you are in your home, you are a teacher at school, you work at the hospital, in the corporate world, wherever you are a leader. And you need to ensure that you challenge the norms, the bad practices that you see, call those out. We want to make sure that we can count on you, that we will make gender equality an issue of our time for both men and women. And with that, I really wish to again thank you very much for joining us for our 5th Gender Equality and Wellness and Leadership Program. As they say in yoga, namaste.
Thank you so much, Dr. P, for your time. Thank you so much to the Motsepe Foundation. Thank you so much to my co-facilitator, our esteemed panelists, to each and every one of you audience members who joined us. Thank you so much to the hardworking technical team, making sure that they capture the essence of our event with all the adversities of technology. Thank you to each and every cameraman, making sure that this is history archived. Thank you so much to each and every one of the assistants, the volunteers who are coming, making sure that we're complying with COVID-19 protocols, but also ensuring that it's a smooth event. These are just some of the heroes that don't wear capes, and they're not on television and radio and are celebrated, but they are really behind the scenes, making sure that this event is truly informative, educational, but is witnessed by the world at large. Thanks to each and every one of you for coming. But of course, I would reiterate, as Dr. Precious Motsepe mentioned, that there's still more for you in terms of cooking lessons, health, or rather mental health tips, and a yoga session and a bit of entertainment. Please stay wherever you are, even virtually. Network with some of your co-audience members who are asking questions. Change numbers or even email addresses. See how you can work together to make this world a better place for women and for all who live in it. But from me, Dumela Motutwane, and my co-facilitator, it's been a wonderful time spending with you from morning till now. Thank you so much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Hello everyone, welcome to the wellness part of our program. The Gender Equality and Wellness Program encompasses leadership and wellness as part of what women ought to do in order that they should look after themselves, become successful, participate in any activity, be it in business, whether you're a teacher, professional person. You need to look after your health. You need to look after yourself. So, take it from me, I'm a doctor. I know if you don't look after yourself, then you have nothing to offer to the people that care most about you. In introducing this session, I've got a very wonderful lady, Anesu Mbizo, who's going to take us through yoga, and I'm going to ask her a few questions. So, Anesu, I tend to have so much stress at the end of the day. How will yoga help me?
Well, Dr. Precious, just like you, I also studied medicine, and one of the things that I really struggled with was trying to find a physical practice where my body would find the physical benefits of exercise while still being in a space where I felt like I could escape from the stresses of my studies and of my work.
That's amazing. So can anybody do yoga? Can young people and old people do yoga? Is this something that
anybody can do.
This is one of the favorite questions that I get asked about yoga. Yes, 100%. Yoga is for absolutely everybody, so that it doesn't matter how old you are, what gender you identify as, your sexual orientation, or even your race or cultural background. Yoga is really for everybody, even those who are wheelchair bound. I've taught wheelchair bound students yoga before, so it's a really inclusive practice for all.
Thank you, Anesu. This is really fantastic. I think when I was a practicing doctor, I used to tell my patients, you need to look after yourself in terms of what you eat, how you treat your body. Exercise is very, very important. Yoga is really, really wonderful because it combines mind, body, and soul. So you are in such harmony. And I really, really have been enjoying doing a bit of yoga over the last few days, particularly when I'm feeling a bit stressed at the end of the day. I'm going to hand over to you now so you can take us through our yoga session. Everybody, please try it. It really works. It's good for stress. It's good for preventing illnesses like heart diseases. It can prevent cancer because it reduces your stress levels. It is a really wonderful way of feeling good about yourself. As they say, namaste.
Alright, welcome everybody. Let's get into some yoga. So all you'll need is a yoga mat or a carpet or flat surface to practice on, and just a cushion. It can be a pillow from your bed, a cushion from the couch, whatever you need just to sit on so you are nice and comfortable. Now the yoga practice we're going to be doing today is absolutely perfect for beginners. So if this is your very first time doing yoga, absolutely no problem. Just focus on connecting to your breath. And we're going to be doing some really simple movements to help to relieve any stress or tension from the body. So when you're ready, come into a nice cross-legged position down on your mat. If sitting cross-legged doesn't suit you, you can bring the soles of your feet to touch. You can even extend your legs out or just find a comfortable position that feels good. We're going to rest our hands on our knees or on our laps, closing the eyes. And just take a few moments to fidget, to adjust, to make sure that you are completely comfortable. Relax your shoulders down your spine. Soften into the muscles of your face. And start to connect to your breath. Let's take 3 deep breaths together. Taking a deep breath in through the nose. Open your mouth and sigh all of the breath out, feeling any stresses or worries leaving your body. Choosing to dedicate each and every breath, each and every movement that we do together towards initiating your self-healing journey. Taking one more deep breath in through the nose. And opening the mouth to sigh the breath out. Keep your eyes closed, allow your breath to follow its natural rhythm. And let's bring our hands together in prayer at the heart, starting to rub the hands together. Bring your hands to rest over your closed eyes. Gently flutter the eyes open, reconnecting to the sense of sight. And then widen the space between your fingers, allow more and more light in, before releasing your hands all the way down to the knees. If you need to release your legs, now's the time to do so. And we're just going to start off by easing into the neck. So as we inhale, we're going to turn our heads to look over towards the right. And as we exhale, turning our heads to look over to the left. The breath is really important, so breathing in through the nose as you turn your head over to the right. One more round. Inhale, looking over towards the right, feeling that stretch on the side of your neck. Exhale, over to the left. Gently bring your head to center. Let's tuck our chins down towards our chests now. Working into the back of the neck as we inhale, we're going to roll our head over towards the right. You can close your eyes at any point during our practice. Just continue to breathe and allow this to be your safe space of peace. Exhale as we roll our heads over to the left. Take your time, working into all of those muscles in the back of the neck. Very gently bring your chin back down towards the chest and center, head hanging heavy, shoulders relaxed. And then on an inhale breath, gently lifting the head back up. Some shoulder shrugs are next. On the inhale, let's lift our shoulders up towards our ears. Open the mouth, pull the shoulders back and down the spine as you relax the shoulders down. Deep breath in, expand the lungs as you lift your shoulders up. Long breath out, pull the shoulders back and down your spine. Let's do one more deep breath in through the nose. And a long breath out, breathing out as you relax the shoulders down. Lovely. Let's roll over. We're going to come onto the hands and knees now. If you're sitting on a cushion, just put it to one side. And we're going to come onto the hands and knees. Now, some of us have sensitive knees, so if you do, you can always bring a cushion underneath your knees for support. Another nice trick, if you don't have a cushion at hand, is to fold your mat over and to bring your knees on that folded part of your mat. My knees are fine though. So I'm going to come to a nice, comfortable tabletop. Take some time to spread out your fingers, really placing each finger down with intention. Intentionality is huge in our yoga practice. Into cat and cow, we're going to take an inhale to drop the belly, lift the tailbone, lift your chin, pull your shoulders back, and as you exhale, push the ground away, tuck your chin to your chest, push the hips forward as you lift your spine up to the sky. Just two more, you're doing great. Take a deep breath in, lifting up, stretching into the front side of the body. Exhale, compressing the front side of the body as we stretch into the back. And our last one, let's take a deep breath in. And a long breath out. Breathing out as you push the hips forward. Come to a nice tabletop once again, opening into the hips next. We're going to take our hands and walk them 1 hand's distance further forward. Quadrantas are next. We're going to walk our hands 1 hand distance forward. Then on the inhale, very gently lean your hips forward and down. Pull the shoulders back, lift your chin, and as you exhale, push into the hands. Use the hands to send your sit bones back towards the heels, forehead towards the ground. And last one, inhale to move forward. And exhale to move back. Gently come back into your tabletop, bringing our hands underneath our shoulders. And we're going to move into the most famous yoga pose that I think everybody knows, downward facing dog. So let's start off by tucking our toes. Take an inhale, spread out your fingers, press into the hands, lift your knees. Exhale, push your belly towards your thighs. And on an inhale, just straighten out your legs. Now you're in your downward facing dog. A lot of weight in the wrists and shoulders. You can come onto the knees when you need to. But we're just going to bend one knee and then the other. We won't be here for too long, so just breathe. Yoga is all about finding peace in discomfort, so use your breath to settle down. Straighten out both legs. Inhale, bend the knees, and let's walk our hands back towards our feet. All the way back, the heels will ground. You want your feet to be hip distance apart. Nice bend in the knees. We're going to grab onto opposite elbows, tucking our chins towards our chests. And we're just going to sway from side to side. Exhale as you sway to the other. Then come to center. Release your elbows, turning the head from side to side. The neck should be completely relaxed. Circle into the shoulders. And just take a deep breath in. Long breath out. We're going to start to gently roll up to stand. Keep your knees bent, and one vertebra at a time, let's start to slowly roll up. Taking your time, eventually the spine uncurls, knees straighten, shoulders open, and the last thing to lift is the gaze. shaking out our bodies. We're going to come to stand and do our final 2 sequences, which help us to release tension from the body. So let's start off with some twists. Feet are just bigger than hip distance apart. Arms are nice and limp alongside us. And we're just going to start to twist from side to side, keeping the arms heavy. Breathing, inhaling as you sway to one side. Exhale to the other. I like to imagine any stresses shooting out of my fingers. You can do this any day if you feel like you need to decompress. And then let's slowly slow down, coming to stand. Now, final exercise is a full body release. I'm going to stand to the side so you can see what my body's doing. Again, feet are about hip distance apart or a little bit wider. We're going to take an inhale, lifting our arms alongside our heads, pushing the hips forward, and then arch back a little bit, looking up to your fingertips. Take a long breath out as you bend the knees, sway with the hands, really pulling them down as we release. Inhale, make this one a good one. Exhale, and let's do one more. Deep breath in, hold the breath in at the top, push your hips forward, stretch, and open the mouth, sigh it out, let it go. Just hang heavy, you can sway from side to side. Close your eyes for a moment, just slowing the heart rate and the breath down. And then come to center, slowly rolling all the way up, push into the heels as you go, coming all the way up to stand. Let's bring our hands together in prayer at our hearts, closing the eyes, tucking our chins towards our chests. Take a moment to thank your body for all of the hard work it's done today in your yoga practice. And also thanking yourself for showing up onto your mat and for initiating your own self-healing journey. It has been my
mental health pandemic that may in some way be able to be harnessed to improve our present and our future going forward. We often talk about post-traumatic stress. There's also some potential for post-traumatic growth. But what are we going through from a mental health perspective now? First of all, I would like to just emphasize that some of the feelings, the anxiety, the fear generated by huge uncertainty are really normal reactions to a very difficult, unprecedented situation. It's the situation that is uncertain, and our feelings that reflect trauma are in relation to that situation. How are we meant to feel coping with the losses of money, of jobs, of physical contact, of predictability, of a sense of self, of a normal kind of life as we know it? Of course, there are going to be these feelings that are generated. The difficulty, of course, is how do you handle them? And when do you say that there's a mental health problem? When do these feelings spiral out of control? And they can. So the first thing to say is that you have to own the story before you can define the ending. And that's important because it's counterintuitive. Usually we take uncomfortable, difficult feelings, sometimes shameful feelings of not being good enough, strong enough, coping well enough, and our tendency is to shove them away or make excuses. We'll be better in the morning, it's just a stage we're going through, deal with it, you're a strong person. And what happens is that our emotional buckets start looking like the Alps. And if you don't name it, you can't tame it. And if you don't own the story, sure as anything, the story will own you and will spill out in all sorts of behavioral, emotional, psychological, relational, familial ways. Lower backache, migraine headache, sleep disturbances, eating problems, irritability, shortness of temper, difficulty in your relationships, tendency to be isolated or over-aggressive. So when do you know that it's time to ask for help? If these feelings become out of control and they last for any length of time, and I'm talking about even more than a day or two, if they start affecting your work and if they start affecting your relationships, you need to make that call to one of the many, many facilities, helplines, volunteer organizations, or professions. You also need to stop catastrophizing. Our heads run away with us. What if this is happening, that's happening, and we spiral out of control. It's important to take a breath, to move from the primitive brain into the rational brain, into the present moment, and say, stay calm. What would you tell a friend? What are the facts that are going on? And some really important tips is to have your tribe. And your tribe can be a tribe of one. Someone or some ones who are going to listen to you empathically, not being an echo chamber, not telling you how bad their situation is, not waiting to respond, but listen to understand. When you are understood, that's tough. You're going through a hard time. You have the feeling of calming down and that someone is there for you. It's also important to practice self-compassion. Cut yourself some slack. Plan a routine that includes exercise, good sleep, nutrition, work in certain spaces, and filling yourself up with something that's enjoyable. Could be a Netflix, could be a book, could be I need some space, could be the capacity to say I also count, I've got to put my oxygen mask first, I have to look after my husband's wife, my children's mother, my colleagues, take care of myself. And then look towards what you've learned, a new sense of gratitude, a priority of connection. We are emphasizing human contact more than we ever did before. We have a better balance and a humility about what is in and what is out of our sense of control. And we definitely are more compassionate members of the human race. And those are just a few things that I hope we take with us long after this pandemic is over. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. I'm going to be cooking today as part of our last session to ensure that you understand the importance of healthy eating. We went through everything around what we need to do to be strong, women in business. We learned about women's health, and now the last part is going to be about healthy eating. Chef Coco, you're going to take me through the first course and then you'll explain all the other courses as we go.
Absolutely, yes.
Please tell us about the courses.
First of all, thank you very much for allowing me to be presenting this with you. I'm going to present you 3 dishes. In my imagination, how will 3 African queens welcome a South African queen in their home through food.
Wow.
First destination, Central Africa, where I will do a smoked chicken with aramanth and peanut butter. That smoked chicken, something very healthy, the aramanth, the peanut butter, all that is really flavor that tells you that you are in Central Africa.
And aramanth is morogo.
Exactly, here in South Africa.
Thank you. Okay. And what have we got for the second course?
So the second, I will take you to West Africa, where I will prepare something simple and quick that you just arrived and, you know, like a surprise at the house. Quickly take some plantain, a little bit of meat with some suya spices, just to have like a snack while we are chatting.
Fantastic. And then finally,
I will take you into the East African islands, Mauritius, Seychelles, Zanzibar, all that to show you the beauty of the different spices that we have, how we eat fish, the seafood in that region.
That sounds amazing. Let's get into it, Chef. I'm so hungry.
Perfect. So imagine a dish where you have smoked chicken and amaranth, which is called morogo here in South Africa. Exactly. And it will be served with a little bit of rice. So without waiting too much, let me quickly get into this dish and show you how it's going to be done.
And you have to tell me what I need to do to help.
You know what? I think today you will just help me tasting and enjoying the food.
I like that.
Okay? So, quick one. A touch of some sunflower oil. When it's hot, I'm going to add my onions. We almost have onions in everything. Okay?
It has health benefits as well.
Exactly. So, I'm adding this. I'm going to add my amaranth, which is already blanched, so we don't have to wait too much for it to cook. Here, I'm going to add also a touch of tomato paste. If you like tomato, you can use the tomato, the whole tomato. But the reason I'm using the tomato paste is it has a much stronger taste of tomato. It's really a concentrate of tomato. And then I'm going to add what we use in Central Africa and also in the north part of South Africa. We use peanut butter to make any dish a little bit creamier.
I see.
Okay?
Well, but I think now we've got some green vegetables, we've got onions, and we've got protein, and we've got fat in that dish. This is healthy eating. This is very, very healthy. Okay.
Then I'm going to add smoked chicken. Okay?
Smoked chicken.
Exactly.
Can I use ordinary chicken?
You can use ordinary chicken, but I like the flavor that comes out of the smoked chicken. And also in Central Africa, it's one of the ways to preserve the meat that we have. We don't have like fridges and stuff like that. So here we use whether smoking fish, smoking chicken, smoking any meat. I have a touch of chicken stock.
Wonderful.
Once again, because I need the flavors to really come out nicely.
So you're not adding salt or pepper, you use chicken stock
after at the taste.
Oh, I see.
I always add at the taste seasoning later. We have almost all the ingredients that we're cooking already. The peanut butter is dissolving nicely.
Ooh, it smells good.
See, I'm gonna just wait for this to reduce a little bit. Okay, now we are ready to plate, but let me quickly taste it. There you go. You see, I don't need any extra salt. Maybe what I could have added is a touch of chili, but usually even the chili, it's mainly to flavor the whole thing, not just for it to be too hot.
Not to add,
exactly, not to add extra heat, but mainly to add some flavoring.
So what do you normally serve this with?
this, I will show you. I'm serving it with rice. Usually, it's served with rice. Here, I have cooked rice already, which I made in a nice little bowl.
Oh, wow.
Just to change slightly presentation, I'm going to garnish it with some baby aromas. Again, just to add. And so I'm going to finish up with a little bit of edible flour. And this is how a Central African queen will welcome you at her house.
Oh wow, this is amazing. I already feel like a queen.
You are, definitely.
Oh wow. Oh my goodness, this smells amazing.
Thank you.
This is our first course. It's a very healthy meal, simple ingredients, very quick to prepare. I bet Chef Coco, this must be one of your favorite dishes.
Absolutely, one of my favorite dishes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we're going to go into the second dish, which will be a West African dish, okay? And I will show you how to quickly prepare that and present that.
Fantastic.
So while Dr. Precious have quickly stepped out for something, let me take you through the second dish, which is a West African quick snack that I've imagined where she will be welcome to eat it. Okay? So we have a meat which is marinated in suya spices. Suya spices is this spice where you have grounded nuts, some chili flakes, a touch of ginger powder, some smoked paprika, all that will give that burning and smoky flavor that we'll find from the pan. And I'm going to be serving it with some plantain banana, which is very famous in West Africa and also in Central Africa. And I will be frying this marinated meat with some onion, okay? Without waiting too much, let's get started. Okay. I'm going to add some oil in my hot pan, and I'm going to start with the onion. Again, red onion, I like the health benefit of it. I just want to quickly saute them. They become white, translucent, okay? And then I can put my piece of meat. I can actually even put one by one. Make sure they are very well marinated. And by the way, this is a meat that has been marinated in suya spice for a couple of hours, I would say. I did it a couple of hours before we start here. And I want it to be seared, to be caramelized with all these flavors. Add some heat here. And as I say, this is really a very simple dish, but very healthy, fast, quick. When you have someone arriving unexpectedly and you quickly cook something for your guests. And basically, that's what I had to do. Here the focus was on the meat, the suya spices, and the other star of the day is the plantain that I'm going to plate with. Okay, get my plate here. Make sure you don't burn either the onion or the meat. The only thing is just to make sure that the spices, the suya spices, are really well coating the meat. And here I am very happy the way it is. I can start plating. You see how the meat is beautifully caramelized. Just make sure you remove the excess fat. Put that in the middle. Here. These caramelized onion with the suya spice really taste beautifully, and all the flavor that come out of this pan is really magic. Here I'm going to put some plantain, and I'm going to add some on the side, just because I love plantain that much here. And basically I am ready to garnish it with some micro herb, just to make the dish look actually much more appetizing. And here you are with your beautiful, quick West African snack that is prepared in under 5 minutes. Enjoy it. So for the last dish, while we're waiting for Dr. Precious to come back, I'm going to be taking you into East Africa, where I will present a dish from the island of East Africa, your Zanzibar, Seychelles, Mauritius. So it's basically a dish with the seafood, and I want to showcase the coconut milk and the different spices that will be used. Okay? Let me hit the pan. Add some oil in it, and I will be starting, I'll add a little bit more, starting by cooking the fish, a touch of salt, very little, because I'm going to be using tamarind to salt up everything. Add some black pepper, which is really originate from the East Africa, and put my fish. I'm putting on the skin side. And make sure that it doesn't stick too much. Quickly fry on the other side as well. And I'm putting it in the pan just to show, how can I say, just to quickly sear it, okay? And I'll finish the cooking into the oven, okay? I think I don't need more than this. Okay, sorry. Here I'm going to put back here. Here. Now I'm going to do my prawns, but I like my red onion, doing it in the same pan so we can keep all the different flavor that we used. Here, I'm going to put in my prawns, my 4 prawns, and you'll see it's really something that goes very quickly. A little touch of garlic. Garlic, you can have that smell of beautiful smell of garlic, and then I'm going to put my different curry or masalas, however you want to call it. Here you are. So in there is all these spices that's coming out. You arrive at the best time.
This looks very good.
Thank you.
Is this now our final dish?
Yes, these are all the smell from the East Africa.
I can smell some curry.
Exactly. You know that East Africa was the world capital of all the spices.
Absolutely.
And that's what I wanted to focus on.
For sure.
So we've cooked already the fish.
The fish is ready.
I'm going to finish cooking it in the oven.
All right.
Putting it in here. Here I have my onion, and I'm going to deglaze this with coconut cream.
Wow.
You see? Again, I wanted to show how African food can be...
Why use coconut cream? Can I use any other cream?
You can, but it will it will not have that African, East African touch and texture, exactly. And I prefer coconut cream than dairy cream, than milk, than cow cream. Yeah.
But very healthy.
Exactly, it's very, very healthy. So I have this, which is...
How long do you cook this for?
This takes less than 5 minutes, maximum. Yeah.
Okay.
As I say, I'm going to add a good spoon of tamarind.
Tamarind.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tamarind paste is that will give that salty flavor.
So it's a mixture of cream, curry,
exactly. Cream, curry, coconut cream, curry, and tamarind.
And tamarind. Okay.
And tamarind will give that citrusy, sweet and sour taste that I really love. I'm going to add some extra coconut cream. You can see something very, very rich as a dish. Okay, my prawns look cooked.
So how do you tell that the prawns are cooked? They change color?
They change color, they become red, and also by the texture.
Okay.
You can feel that they are firm, they're starting to get firm. You don't want them to cook too much, so they are too firm and they become too chewy. For me, this
just right.
Is right and it could be. This is perfect. This is perfect.
Oh.
So,
and how
plating,
we said yes?
Plating it. I'm going to cook it with black rice and brown rice mixed. I'm going to take a little bit of this sauce, add in my cooked rice.
So we prepared a mixture of brown rice and wild rice. I see a bit of wild rice in there.
So I prepare it to make sure that it really looks great.
That looks amazing. So you said this dish is from
East Africa. So Mauritius, Seychelles, Zanzibar. Now that I'm mixed the sauce with my rice, let me quickly plate it. I have my plate here. This. I'm going to put some rice in the middle.
So presentation is everything.
Absolutely. You will eat it with your eyes closed. And there is so many other different places you can eat. So let me quickly take my fish. Okay. I'm actually going to use just one piece. Now remove this.
And what kind of fish is this?
So this is tilapia. You know, in East Africa, we love our tilapia, especially from the Great Lake. In Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, we really, really love that. Okay, let me add the little prawns. Oops. On the side. And I'm going to add sauce.
It looks so good.
Thank you very much.
Oh wow.
Just not too much sauce because we know the prawns have already the sauce.
Correct, yeah.
We have the sauce in the rice as well. We don't want it to be too saucy. Again, my little flour. I love it. Some greenery. The dish require a little bit, a touch of green.
Yes.
And this is a dish I'm sure will take you straight away into the islands.
Oh, this is amazing.
Enjoy it.
Merci, Chef
Merci
Coco.
beaucoup, merci beaucoup, doctor.
So this is our final dish. Another healthy dish made with fish, prawns, a mixture of brown rice, and it's really, really looking very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chef Coco.
My absolute pleasure. And yeah, once again, happy International Women's Day.
Absolutely. We have a small surprise for you though.
Okay.
Before you leave, the ladies and men at the office said I must give you this t-shirt. So we, with this year's International Women's Day, we choose to challenge any gender disparities, gender inequality, and we want you to be counted in to fight this.
You can count me in.
Absolutely.
You can count me in. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oi,